The desert does not announce its intentions. There is no warning sound, no visible shift dramatic enough for an untrained eye to recognize. At night, it even appears calm, cooler, almost forgiving. The sun has already fallen beyond the horizon, leaving behind a sky stripped of color. What remains is not darkness, but a diluted blue-gray glow spread thin across the sand. The heat of the day has not disappeared. It has only withdrawn, sinking into the ground, storing itself beneath the surface like something patient. The air barely moves. Wind that once carved lines across the dunes now hesitates, as if unsure whether to continue. Grains of sand rest where they fell hours ago untouched. Even sound seems unwilling to travel here. Footsteps fade almost immediately. Distant movements fail to echo. To a human observer, this moment feels safe. Night in the desert is often described as relief. A break from the brutal glare, a window where survival feels possible again. Temperatures drop. Shadows stretch. The threat appears to retreat with the sun, but the desert does not cool evenly. Its surface may surrender heat quickly, but deeper layers hold on. Energy remains trapped below, radiating upward in slow, invisible waves. What seems like rest is only delay. The ground remembers the day. Across the landscape, subtle gradients form pockets where warmth lingers, longer zones where cooling happens unevenly. These differences are too small to measure, without instruments too subtle to feel through boots or skin. Yet they exist, shaping the next hours in ways that cannot be seen. Nothing dramatic happens yet. No collapse, no sudden danger. But the balance has already begun to shift. Insects emerge cautiously, testing the surface. Some move freely, assuming the night has restored neutrality. Others hesitate, tracing short paths before retreating again. The sand beneath them looks identical, but it is not. Every step is taken on memory. Above, the sky offers no guidance. Stars remain fixed. Constellations hold their positions as they have for centuries. There is no sign written overhead, no signal of what is accumulating below. This is how the desert works. Not through violence, but through timing. Hours before the peak heat returns, the environment begins preparing its response. Energy redistributes. Pressure changes microscopically. The ground exhales warmth in pulses too slow to feel too broad to notice. To human senses, nothing feels wrong. The silence deepens, not because life has vanished, but because movement has become inefficient. Sound absorbs into the sand. Vibrations die quickly. Even small disturbances fail to travel far. In this stillness, danger does not approach. It waits. The desert has always favored patience. Creatures that survive here are not the fastest or the strongest. They are the ones that recognize change before it demands reaction. At this hour, there are no visible signs of collapse, no bodies, no panic, no struggle. Only absence begins to deform the quiet withdrawal of movement from places where it once occurred freely. Trails that would normally appear remain unmarked. Areas that were active hours earlier now feel abandoned, though nothing obvious has driven life away. The ground continues to hold heat. Each grain of sand acts as a storage unit, releasing energy slowly, unevenly. Combined, they create thermal fields that shift minute by minute. These fields do not burn yet. They warn silently. The desert does not kill suddenly. It narrows options first. As night progresses, temperature differences that seem negligible begin to stack. Small margins close. Routes that were safe become inefficient. Places that offered shelter now trap warmth instead of releasing it. The environment is not hostile yet, but it is no longer neutral. This is the moment most creatures misread. To eyes trained on obvious threats, the desert appears calm, cooler than the day, manageable, survivable. The absence of extreme heat gives a false sense of reset, as if the cycle has ended and will begin again from zero. It does not. The cycle overlaps. Heat accumulates, pauses, redistributes, and then returns stronger than before. Those who move without accounting for this overlap do not fail immediately. They simply find themselves exposed when correction is no longer possible. Nothing dramatic marks this transition. No line separates safety from danger. No sound announces the closing window. Only time does, and time in the desert is never evenly shared. The desert is often described as empty, a vast, silent place defined by what it lacks: water, shade, shelter. But this description misses something essential. The desert is not absence. It is accumulation. What looks motionless is only storing energy. Beneath the surface, layers of sand and stone retain the heat of the day, holding it long after the sun has disappeared. This stored warmth does not vanish evenly. It migrates, it concentrates. It creates gradients that shift slowly, reshaping the environment hour by hour. The night does not reset the desert. It reorganizes it. As darkness deepens, the temperature at ground level continues to change, not by dropping uniformly, but by redistributing. Some patches cool quickly. Others remain warm far longer than expected. These inconsistencies are invisible, yet they define which paths remain viable and which quietly turn lethal. The desert is not flat in function, even when it appears flat in form. Heat radiates upward in soft waves, interacting with cooler air above. Where the ground releases energy unevenly, microcurrents form. They are too weak to become wind, too slow to be felt, but strong enough to influence how scent travels, how moisture evaporates, how life positions itself. Pressure shifts subtly. Not enough to register on human skin, but enough to alter how sound dissipates, how vibrations behave, how movement is perceived by creatures attuned to these signals. Nothing dramatic announces these changes. The desert does not fracture or collapse. It tightens. Spaces that felt open hours ago begin to feel constrained. Routes narrow not because obstacles appear, but because tolerance disappears. The margin for error shrinks without leaving a trace. This is how the desert prepares its most dangerous phase. Long before the next sunrise pushes temperatures beyond survivable limits, the groundwork has already been laid. The environment has rearranged itself into zones of tolerance and zones of risk, though to an untrained observer, they appear identical. At this stage, the desert still allows movement, but it begins to punish inefficiency. Every unnecessary step becomes a liability. Every pause accumulates cost. Energy drains faster than it can be replaced, even in creatures adapted to scarcity. The system does not attack, it evaluates. Some areas hold heat in ways that trap life close to the surface. Others release warmth upward, creating pockets of relative stability. These distinctions are temporary. They change as the night progresses, shifting the map silently beneath the feet of everything that moves. What makes this moment deceptive is its calm. The desert at night feels manageable, survivable. The absence of visible threat invites confidence. Movement feels easier. Air feels lighter. The illusion of balance takes hold. But balance has already passed. The system has tipped not violently, but precisely. Energy stored during the day now circulates with purpose. Not intention, but consequence. The desert responds to physics, not mercy. What survives here does so by aligning with these responses, not resisting them. This is why most losses in the desert do not happen at noon. They are decided hours earlier. By the time the sun returns, conditions merely reveal outcomes that were already locked in. The desert does not kill in the moment of peak heat. It finalizes decisions made long before. At night, the ground listens. It registers pressure from movement, absorbs vibration, reacts to disturbances in ways too slow for human awareness. Each interaction leaves a faint imprint, altering how heat disperses, how the surface breathes. These imprints overlap. Paths used repeatedly become thermally distinct. Sheltered areas trap warmth longer than expected. What once offered protection can become a reservoir of stored danger. Nothing about this feels urgent, and that is the trap. Urgency implies noise, motion resistance. The desert operates through delay, through systems that move just slowly enough to evade attention. Creatures that treat the night as a pause often fail to notice how much has already changed. They mistake reduced temperature for safety, stillness for neutrality, but neutrality no longer exists. The desert has entered a phase where every action carries delayed consequence, where recovery windows close invisibly, where adaptation matters more than strength. This is not yet the moment of collapse. It is the moment before. The environment has aligned itself. Heat, pressure, and structure now exist in configurations that will soon become unforgiving. Those who remain exposed, who misjudge the timing, will find themselves trapped not by sudden violence, but by accumulated disadvantage. Nothing needs to happen now. The system is already in motion. The desert does not rush. It allows time to do the work. And time here always favors what understands it first. Movement returns to the surface quietly. Not all at once, not everywhere. It emerges in fragments, brief and cautious, as if testing whether the desert has truly settled or is merely holding its breath. At first, there is no clear shape to recognize. Only a low shift across the sand. A line that changes direction without leaving a trail long enough to follow. The surface barely responds, grains sliding back into place, as if nothing passed through. The presence is small, close to the ground, existing in the narrow space where heat and shadow intersect. It does not rush. Speed would cost too much here. Instead, it moves with restraint, maintaining constant contact with the surface, as if reading it. The desert does not react. It does not need to. Under the dim light of the night sky, the form becomes clearer, though never fully revealed. A segmented body lifted just enough to avoid prolonged exposure to the sand. Limbs spread wide, distributing weight, minimizing pressure. Every detail suggests efficiency rather than aggression. This is not a creature announcing itself. It does not claim territory or display dominance. Its movement does not challenge the environment. It accommodates it. The desert has many inhabitants, but few remain active this long into the night. Most retreat once the surface cools enough to permit rest. Others gamble on brief forays, returning quickly to shelter. This presence does neither. It remains outside longer than expected, yet never commits to exposure. Its path avoids areas that appear identical to the human eye. It changes direction for no visible reason, steering away from sections of sand that offer no visual warning. The shifts are subtle, measured in degrees rather than angles, but consistent enough to form a pattern. This is not wandering. The body stays low, close to the ground, but never presses into it fully. Contact is deliberate, short, controlled. The surface is sampled, not endured. There is no hesitation in these movements, no trial and error. Each adjustment appears preemptive, made before the environment demands it. The desert remains silent. Wind does not rise. Temperature does not drop dramatically. Nothing obvious occurs that would explain this caution. And yet, the behavior continues. The presence pauses briefly, then resumes along a different trajectory. It does not backtrack. It does not freeze. It simply redirects, as if the ground itself has communicated something that cannot be seen or heard. This is where most observers misinterpret what they see. The creature is often framed as reactive, a survivor that responds quickly when threatened, a predator that strikes when disturbed. But here there is no immediate threat. No prey, no pursuit, nothing to respond to. And still the adjustments persist. Its body remains aligned with the surface in a way that minimizes prolonged exposure. Segments lift and lower rhythmically, preventing any single point from absorbing too much heat. The tail stays raised not in warning, but in balance. Not as a weapon, but as a stabilizer. Every part of the movement suggests anticipation rather than reaction. This presence does not test the desert. It negotiates with it. In other parts of the landscape, activity continues without such restraint. Insects move freely, crossing open ground with confidence granted by cooler air. Small nocturnal animals emerge briefly, reassured by the absence of direct heat. But this figure does not follow them. It avoids the most active zones, even when they offer opportunity. It does not rush toward abundance. It does not exploit the night simply because it can. The desert at this hour is deceptive. Surface temperatures have dropped enough to create the illusion of safety. To many, the danger appears distant, postponed until the sun returns. This presence behaves as if that assumption is false. It remains attuned to the ground-adjusting movement, based on conditions that have not yet escalated. The signals it responds to are faint, distributed, embedded in the environment itself. Nothing about its behavior suggests fear. There is no panic, no urgency, no erratic motion, only alignment. The creature moves as if the desert is already changing, even though to most senses, it is not. This is not a display of intelligence in the human sense. There is no planning, no conscious prediction. What appears here is something older, a calibration refined over time, shaped by survival in a place where mistakes are rarely corrected. The desert does not forgive miscalculations. It does not offer second chances disguised as recovery. What survives here does so by reducing error before it manifests. As the presence continues across the sand, its path becomes harder to follow. The ground absorbs its trace almost immediately. Nothing marks where it has been. No disturbance remains long enough to study. Only the absence of movement lingers behind it. This is how the desert allows certain lives to persist. Not by offering protection, but by demanding precision. The creature does not dominate this environment. It fits into it. And that distinction between domination and fit determines who remains when conditions finally cross the threshold where reaction alone is no longer enough. For now, the presence continues to move guided by information the desert does not broadcast openly. It follows gradients too shallow to measure responding to changes, too slow to alarm. The night remains calm, but beneath the surface alignment is already underway. Survival in the desert is rarely dramatic. There are no prolonged chases, no drawn-out confrontations, no visible triumphs. What endures here does so quietly through systems refined to operate within margins so narrow that excess becomes fatal. The presence moving across the sand exists within those margins. It does not rely on strength. It does not attempt speed beyond what the environment permits. Its survival is built on restraint, on knowing when not to move, when not to engage, when not to remain. The desert offers little forgiveness. Energy spent cannot easily be recovered. Every action has a cost that accumulates, invisibly compounding until tolerance collapses. Most losses occur not because of sudden failure, but because balance erodes without notice. This presence behaves as if that erosion is always underway. Unlike many creatures that treat the night as reprieve, it does not assume conditions have reset. The drop in surface temperature does not prompt carelessness. Movement remains measured, limited to what is necessary. Time is not something it spends freely. Its posture reflects this economy. Limbs remain wide, distributing contact, preventing any single point from absorbing prolonged heat. The body maintains distance from the surface, reducing thermal exchange without breaking contact entirely. Every adjustment minimizes accumulation. The desert is not uniform in how it absorbs and releases heat. Shallow depressions trap warmth longer. Elevated ridges cool faster but expose movement. Compact sand behaves differently than loose grains. These distinctions shift hourly, reshaping the terrain in ways that are difficult to perceive. The presence responds to these differences without hesitation. It avoids pockets where heat lingers, even when they appear visually identical to safer ground. It chooses routes that favor balance over speed, stability over opportunity. Other inhabitants misread these conditions. Small nocturnal animals emerge with confidence, encouraged by cooler air and darkness. Insects cross open ground freely, assuming the danger has passed. Their movements increase, their exposure lengthens. The desert allows this briefly. The presence does not follow. It remains peripheral, avoiding zones of heightened activity even when those zones promise abundance. Food is not pursued aggressively here. The cost of pursuit often outweighs its reward. Survival in this environment depends less on acquisition than on avoidance. The desert kills through excess movement, excess exposure, excess confidence. What persists understands this intuitively, not as strategy, but as condition. The presence exhibits no signs of stress. There is no frantic motion, no visible urgency. Its behavior remains consistent, even as surrounding activity fluctuates. This consistency is not stubbornness, it is calibration, The desert changes continuously, but not randomly. Patterns exist, thermal rhythms, pressure shifts, energy flows, that repeat with variation, but retain structure. Survival depends on remaining aligned with these rhythms, not reacting once they escalate. The presence appears attuned to these rhythms long before they manifest as threat. Its movements shorten as the night progresses. Pauses extend. Exposure decreases. Where other creatures take advantage of perceived safety, it reduces interaction. This is not withdrawal driven by fear. It is reduction driven by timing. The desert rewards those who arrive early to shelter, not those who run fastest when danger becomes visible. By the time the environment demands urgency, options have already narrowed. The presence behaves as if that narrowing has already begun. Shelter is not treated as refuge, but as constraint. Burrows, crevices, and shallow depressions are chosen carefully, not for immediate comfort, but for how they will behave hours later when heat resurfaces. Some spaces that feel safe now will become traps later. The presence avoids them. It favors locations that permit gradual adjustment rather than total concealment. Places where contact with the ground can be controlled, where retreat remains possible if conditions shift unexpectedly. This is not instinct in its simplest form. It is not mere reaction to discomfort. It is a pattern of survival shaped by repeated exposure to loss. A system refined by what fails as much as by what persists. The desert does not teach through instruction. It teaches through elimination. What remains is what fits. The presence does not dominate its environment. It does not impose itself upon it. It remains viable by staying within boundaries that shift continuously. Boundaries that most creatures recognize only after they have crossed them. As the night advances, activity around it begins to thin. Movements become less frequent. Sounds diminish further. Life retracts gradually, unevenly. The presence has already adjusted. It has reduced its footprint, limited its exposure, aligned itself with conditions that will soon become unforgiving. It does not wait for confirmation. It does not require visible threat. Its survival is built on responding to changes before they demand response. The desert will continue to tighten. Heat will return. Margins will close. When that happens, what remains will not be what moved the most or seized the most opportunity, but what spent the least when the cost was still avoidable. For now, the present settles into a state of controlled stillness. Not retreat, not concealment, alignment. The night remains calm. But the system is already advancing toward its next phase, and only those who have already adjusted will remain within tolerance when it arrives. In the desert, dominance is a misleading concept. Power here is not measured by size, speed, or aggression, but by persistence. The ability to remain present across cycles that eliminate most others. The presence moving low across the sand does not occupy the top of any visible hierarchy. It does not rule territory. It does not displace others through force. Yet it remains where many disappear. This is its position. In the ecosystem of the desert, survival is not awarded to those who consume the most or move the fastest. It is reserved for those who leave the smallest imprint while extracting what is necessary to continue. The presence exists within this narrow band. It is neither apex nor prey in the conventional sense. Larger predators overlook it. Smaller organisms avoid it instinctively. It operates between layers, occupying a zone that rarely attracts attention, yet endures across extremes. Most desert life follows predictable windows of activity. Emergence at dusk, withdrawal before dawn, short bursts of movement separated by long periods of inactivity. These patterns are visible, measurable, and easily disrupted by shifts in temperature or availability. The presence does not rely on these windows. It remains viable across a broader range of conditions, not because it tolerates extremes better, but because it enters and exits exposure with precision. Its activity does not spike dramatically. It adjusts incrementally, maintaining alignment rather than exploiting peaks. This makes it difficult to categorize. Observers often frame desert life through contrast: active versus dormant, predator versus prey, day versus night. The presence fits none of these cleanly. It does not fully retreat, nor does it fully engage. It occupies the transition zones, the margins others pass through briefly. Those margins are where losses accumulate. When conditions deteriorate, many creatures fail not because they lack ability, but because they remain committed to roles that no longer align with the environment. Predators pursue when pursuit is no longer efficient. Prey flee when flight costs more than concealment. The presence avoids this trap by minimizing commitment. It does not pursue aggressively. It does not flee dramatically. Its interactions are brief, targeted, and rarely repeated in the same way. Each engagement remains contextual, adjusted to immediate conditions rather than expectation. This adaptability grants it a unique form of stability. In times of abundance, it does not expand recklessly. In times of scarcity, it does not collapse suddenly. Its survival curve remains relatively flat compared to the sharp rises and falls of other inhabitants. The desert favors such consistency. Extreme environments do not reward specialization that depends on stable conditions. They eliminate it. What persists is versatility constrained by discipline. The presence embodies this balance. Its body plan reflects compromise rather than optimization. It is not built for speed, yet it moves efficiently enough. Not built for endurance, yet it conserves energy with precision. Not built for dominance, yet it avoids confrontation through positioning. This places it outside most direct competition, where other species overlap heavily in time or space, competing for the same resources under the same conditions. The presence reduces overlap. It accesses resources others ignore or abandon early. It occupies ground others vacate without realizing why. This reduces conflict. In an environment where conflict carries high cost, avoidance becomes advantage. The presence benefits not from winning encounters, but from encountering less often. The desert itself reinforces this role. Thermal gradients, pressure shifts, and substrate variability create microhabitats that change hourly. Many species cannot track these changes closely enough to exploit them. They operate on broader cues, light, temperature, availability. The presence responds to finer signals. It positions itself where tolerance remains highest, even if opportunity appears lower. Over time, this trade-off yields persistence. While others experience cycles of boom and collapse, the presence maintains continuity. This continuity does not make it dominant. It makes it reliable. Across seasons, across years, across fluctuations that erase more conspicuous forms of life. The presence remains embedded in the desert's fabric, not as a controlling force, but as a constant. This is why it often escapes notice. Attention gravitates toward extremes. The largest predators, the most dramatic hunts, the most visible migrations. The presence offers none of these. Its survival does not produce spectacle. It produces absence of failure. When the desert tightens, when margins narrow, when recovery becomes impossible, many roles dissolve. The hierarchy flattens. What remains are those whose position was never dependent on excess. The presence belongs to this group. It is not spared by chance. It is preserved by fit. As the night continues, activity around it diminishes further. Paths empty. Movement thins. The environment prepares for its next escalation. The presence remains where it is not because it dominates the desert, but because it has learned where dominance is irrelevant. In this place, survival is not a contest, it is a calibration. Those who misjudge their position are removed quietly. Those who align precisely endure without announcement. The presence has occupied this position for a long time. And when the desert shifts again, as it always does, that position will matter more than strength, speed, or aggression ever could. The first changes do not announce themselves. They do not arrive with urgency or force. They appear as slight deviations, movements, shortened pauses, extended routes, adjusted by degrees too small to seem intentional. To most observers, nothing has changed. The night remains calm. Surface temperatures continue to decline slowly. Air feels lighter. Conditions appear stable enough to support activity. For many inhabitants of the desert, this is the window where movement feels justified again. But beneath that impression, thresholds begin to shift. The ground releases heat unevenly, creating faint gradients that move across the landscape like invisible tides. Pressure redistributes in slow waves, altering how vibration travels, how contact is absorbed, how disturbance dissipates. These changes are continuous, but not uniform. The presence responds before they escalate. Movement becomes more deliberate. Paths shorten. Exposure decreases not suddenly, but progressively. What once required traversal now prompts repositioning instead. This is not retreat. It is recalibration. Where earlier movement traced broader arcs across the surface, it now follows narrower corridors. Routes that previously felt acceptable are abandoned without visible cause. Others are favored repeatedly, even when they offer no immediate advantage. These decisions are made early. There is no visible trigger, no sudden increase in heat, no disturbance that would justify urgency. The environment has not yet crossed into danger, and yet behavior has already shifted. This is the point most observers miss. When change is gradual, it is easy to assume nothing meaningful is happening. But survival in extreme environments depends on recognizing deviation before it becomes escalation. The presence appears tuned to that deviation. Pauses lengthen. Stillness becomes more frequent. Not as concealment, but as assessment. Contact with the ground is shortened further, limited to intervals that prevent accumulation. Each movement now seems to ask a question the environment has not yet answered openly. Is this ground still neutral? Is this path still viable? Is this moment still permissive? The answers are not binary. They are probabilistic. The presence behaves as if the probability has begun to shift. Elsewhere, activity increases briefly. Insects exploit the cooling surface, crossing open ground freely. Small nocturnal animals emerge drawn by opportunity rather than caution. The night appears productive, but the presence does not mirror this pattern. It avoids open areas where activity concentrates. It does not capitalize on abundance simply because it appears safe to do so. Its movement suggests a different assessment of timing. This is not foresight in a cognitive sense. There is no planning, no expectation of future harm. What exists here is alignment with environmental signals that do not register as threat, but as deviation from equilibrium. The desert rarely changes suddenly. It slides. Conditions shift fractionally until accumulated difference becomes decisive. Those who wait for clarity respond too late. Those who adjust early preserve options. The presence adjusts early. Routes are shortened, not because movement has become dangerous, but because tolerance is narrowing. Each step now carries slightly more cost than before. Not enough to feel, but enough to matter over time. The body reflects this shift. Segments lift higher, reducing contact duration. Orientation changes, subtly angling away from areas where heat lingers longer beneath the surface. The posture remains controlled, efficient, unchanged in appearance, but altered in emphasis. These changes are small enough to escape notice unless observed repeatedly. Taken in isolation, they appear insignificant. Taken together, they form a pattern that begins hours before the desert reveals its most lethal phase. The presence does not wait for confirmation. It does not require failure to validate adjustment. This is where survival diverges. Many inhabitants of the desert operate on thresholds that are too coarse. They respond when conditions become uncomfortable, when heat becomes obvious, when movement becomes inefficient. By then, options have already narrowed. The presence responds when conditions begin to drift long before discomfort arrives. Stillness now occupies more time than movement. When motion occurs, it is direct, purposeful, limited. There is no wandering, no exploration beyond necessity. The environment has not demanded this behavior yet, but it will. The desert continues its slow reorganization. Energy migrates upward, pressure shifts further. The margin between viable and risky ground tightens incrementally. Nothing dramatic marks this transition. The night remains quiet. The air remains cool. To most senses, the desert feels unchanged, but the presence behaves as if it is no longer the same environment it was an hour ago. This discrepancy between perception and condition determines survival here. Those who rely on perception act too late. Those who respond to condition act early, often without knowing why. The presence belongs to the latter. Its adjustments do not increase dramatically as the night progresses. They accumulate. Each small change builds upon the previous one, creating a trajectory away from exposure long before exposure becomes unavoidable. This trajectory is not visible. It leaves no trace. Only when the desert escalates, when heat resurfaces rapidly, when tolerance collapses, suddenly will the significance of these early changes become clear. By then, the presence will already be positioned within narrowing margins, while others scramble to adjust under pressure. For now, the desert remains calm, and the first changes, subtle and easily dismissed, continue to guide survival quietly, long before survival appears to be at risk. What happens once can be dismissed as coincidence. What happens twice invites attention. What happens repeatedly, under slightly different conditions, becomes a pattern. The desert offers endless variation. No two nights are identical. Temperatures fluctuate, winds shift, moisture appears briefly and vanishes. Yet beneath this variability, certain sequences repeat not exactly, but consistently enough to shape survival. The presence moves as if it recognizes those sequences. On one night, adjustment begins early. On another, it begins later. Sometimes movement shortens first. Other times, stillness dominates sooner. The order shifts, but the outcome remains familiar, reduced exposure long before danger becomes visible. This repetition is not rigid, it is adaptive. The presence does not follow a fixed routine. It does not retreat at the same hour or resume movement at the same point in the night. Instead, it responds to thresholds that slide from night to night, tracking change rather than time. This is why the pattern is difficult to notice. Observers who expect regularity look for schedules. They search for behaviors tied to dusk, midnight, or dawn. They miss what unfolds independently of the clock. The desert does not operate on time, it operates on accumulation. Each day deposits energy into the ground. Each night redistributes it unevenly. The rate of release changes with cloud cover, wind, humidity, and substrate. Patterns emerge not from repetition of hours, but from repetition of conditions. The presence aligns with those conditions. Across multiple nights, its behavior converges toward the same result: minimal exposure during periods where the environment is preparing to escalate. It does not matter whether escalation arrives sooner or later. The alignment happens regardless. This is not anticipation in a conscious sense. It is calibration refined through repetition. When alignment occurs, once it could be chance. When it occurs across varying contexts, chance becomes an unlikely explanation. The presence behaves as if it is reading a signal that persists beneath surface variability. A baseline shift that announces escalation long before escalation manifests. On some nights, this shift is subtle. The desert cools faster. Winds disperse heat more evenly. The environment appears forgiving. Even then, adjustments occur, though less pronounced. On other nights, the shift is sharper. Heat lingers. Stillness deepens. Gradients tighten quickly. The presence responds earlier and more decisively. The pattern adapts to intensity, not schedule. This adaptability is what distinguishes it from simple reaction. Reaction waits for discomfort. This pattern engages before discomfort arrives. Insects that operate purely on temperature emerge freely when surface readings allow. Small vertebrates move when darkness reduces immediate risk. Their behavior tracks obvious cues. The presence tracks something else. It withdraws from zones that remain thermally active beneath the surface, even when air temperature suggests safety. It avoids areas that will become problematic hours later, even when they appear neutral now. These decisions repeat across nights with different external conditions. The desert does not reveal these cues clearly. They exist as gradients too shallow to feel, as shifts too slow to notice without prolonged exposure. Yet the pattern persists. What reinforces it is outcome. On nights when adjustments occur, early exposure during escalation is minimal. When heat resurfaces aggressively, the presence is already positioned where tolerance remains highest. It does not need to react urgently. On nights when adjustments occur later, consequences appear sooner. Exposure increases. Movement becomes more constrained. Correction costs more. The pattern refines itself through this feedback, not through memory or learning as humans understand it, but through persistence of what aligns and elimination of what does not. The desert teaches through outcome, not instruction. Over time, behavior that engages early survives. Behavior that waits for confirmation does not. This is why the pattern does not look dramatic. There is no single moment where change becomes obvious. No sharp turn that announces adaptation. The repetition exists only when viewed across multiple cycles, multiple nights, multiple conditions. The presence carries this repetition within its movement. Shortened routes recur. Extended stillness reappears. Directional adjustments repeat under different skies. Each instance alone is unremarkable. Together they form consistency. This consistency is what allows survival in a system defined by delayed consequence. The desert rarely punishes immediately. It accumulates error quietly until correction is no longer possible. Patterns that reduce error early remain viable. Patterns that wait for clarity accumulate debt. The presence operates as if it understands this not conceptually, but functionally. Its behavior does not optimize for opportunity. It optimizes for persistence. Across nights, across variations, across imperfect information, the same outcome emerges. Reduced exposure before escalation, alignment before collapse. This is not prediction. It is pattern recognition embedded in movement. The desert continues to change. Conditions fluctuate. Nights differ, but the pattern holds. And in an environment where survival depends on responding to what has not yet become obvious, that consistency matters more than speed, strength, or aggression ever could. For now, the pattern continues quietly repeating itself under different skies, unseen by most unnoticed, until the desert reveals why it mattered. The difference does not appear dramatic at first. It reveals itself slowly through contrast rather than confrontation. Elsewhere in the desert, movement follows a different logic. Many inhabitants respond when conditions become obvious enough to demand response. They move when heat is felt. They retreat when discomfort crosses a threshold that cannot be ignored. Their timing is tied to sensation. The presence is not. As the night deepens, activity around it increases briefly. Insects spread across open ground, drawn by cooler air and reduced predation. Small vertebrates venture farther from shelter, extending their range confident that darkness has restored balance. Their movements are efficient until they are not. These creatures read the desert through cues that are immediate and coarse. Temperature drops. Light fades. Wind shifts. When those cues suggest safety, they proceed. The presence observes none of this escalation. It avoids the most active zones, not because they are dangerous now, but because they will become costly later. Where others extend exposure to exploit opportunity, it shortens exposure to preserve tolerance. This creates separation, not spatially at first, but temporally. The presence withdraws earlier, reduces activity sooner, and limits interaction while others remain engaged. The difference is measured in minutes, at first, then in hours. As conditions continue to reorganize, this gap widens. When the desert begins its next phase, the slow return of stored heat toward the surface, the contrast becomes clearer. Insects that crossed freely now linger too long. Their energy expenditure increases. Recovery slows. Movement becomes erratic. Small vertebrates hesitate, then retreat abruptly, responding to discomfort that arrives faster than expected. Their response is urgent because their margin has already narrowed. The presence does not react. It has already adjusted. Where others scramble to reposition, it remains aligned. Movement remains limited, controlled, purposeful. There is no sudden shift because the shift already happened. This difference in timing is decisive. The desert does not reward late efficiency. It rewards early reduction of cost. By the time escalation becomes visible, the opportunity to adjust cheaply has passed. Other inhabitants learn this only through loss. Some attempt to outrun the change, increasing speed to compensate for rising cost. This accelerates depletion. Others retreat too late, entering shelters that now trap heat rather than release it. The presence does neither. It does not outrun. It does not retreat dramatically. It remains where tolerance is highest, having arrived there when arrival was still inexpensive. This is the chasm between reaction and alignment. Reaction waits for confirmation. Alignment responds to drift. The difference is subtle enough to be dismissed in calm conditions. When the desert tightens, it becomes decisive. As escalation continues, the landscape begins to empty unevenly. Some areas lose activity rapidly. Others hold it briefly before collapsing. The pattern is not uniform. The presence navigates this unevenness without visible effort. Where movement disappears suddenly, it was never present long enough to be affected. Where activity persists dangerously, it avoids engagement altogether. Its survival is not marked by success in competition, but by absence of exposure during failure. This distinction matters. In many environments, competition determines outcome. Speed, strength, aggression decide who eats and who does not. In the desert, competition is secondary. Environment dominates interaction. Those who misjudge the environment lose, regardless of competitive ability. The presence understands this implicitly. It does not challenge others for space. It does not defend territory aggressively. It positions itself where others cannot remain long enough to compete. This creates a quiet advantage. Over time, this advantage accumulates. While other inhabitants experience cycles of expansion and collapse, the presence maintains continuity. Its activity fluctuates, but its existence persists. Observers often misinterpret this persistence. They attribute it to resilience, to toughness, to tolerance of extreme heat. These explanations miss the point. The presence does not tolerate extremes better. It encounters them less. By adjusting early, it reduces exposure to the most lethal phases of the desert's cycle. Where others endure heat directly, it avoids being present when endurance would be required. This avoidance is not cowardice, it is efficiency. The desert does not measure bravery, it measures error. Those who accumulate less error remain viable longer. As the night progresses, the contrast becomes stark. Activity thins dramatically, sounds diminish, movement becomes rare. Where life remains, it is constrained, cautious, expensive. The presence has already reduced its footprint to match this phase. It does not need to change behavior abruptly because its behavior has been changing all along. This is why its survival appears effortless, not because survival is easy here, but because effort has been distributed over time rather than concentrated at crisis. The desert punishes concentrated effort. It rewards distributed restraint. Other inhabitants reveal their limits when escalation arrives. Their responses are visible, dramatic, urgent. The presence reveals nothing because nothing new is required. It is already aligned with conditions others are only beginning to recognize. This gap in timing and response and exposure is the true difference. Not intelligence, not strength, not danger. Just alignment versus reaction. And in a system governed by delayed consequence, that difference decides who remains when the desert completes its shift. Doubt does not arrive as fear. It appears as hesitation, a moment where instinct no longer aligns with what the senses report. For most observers, the desert still feels permissive. The air remains cool enough. The surface does not burn. Movement is possible without immediate cost. Nothing obvious demands retreat. And yet something no longer fits. The night has not changed abruptly, but the sense of neutrality has begun to erode. Paths that once felt interchangeable now carry different weights. Pauses extend slightly longer than before. Movement feels efficient, but not forgiving. This is the point where misjudgment becomes likely. Human perception relies on thresholds that are easy to recognize. Heat must be felt. Discomfort must register. Danger must announce itself through sensation before action feels justified. The desert does not operate on those terms. Its most decisive shifts occur below the threshold of awareness. They exist in gradients too shallow to alarm, in accumulations too slow to trigger urgency. By the time danger is felt, it is no longer optional. The presence moves as if it recognizes this discrepancy. Its behavior now reflects a quiet skepticism toward the environment. Not mistrust, but refusal to accept surface signals at face value. It does not assume that reduced temperature equals safety. It does not treat stillness as stability. Movement becomes increasingly selective. Routes that were acceptable earlier in the night are abandoned without incident. The ground looks the same, but the response to it has changed. This is not indecision, it is reassessment. The desert offers no clear feedback at this stage. Nothing punishes continued movement immediately. Nothing rewards early withdrawal overtly. Both choices appear viable for now. This ambiguity is dangerous. In environments where feedback is delayed, the cost of misinterpretation compounds quietly. Choices that appear harmless now accumulate consequence later when correction is no longer possible. The presence behaves as if it understands this delay. It does not wait for proof. It does not require discomfort to justify adjustment. Instead, it treats uncertainty itself as information. Where the environment no longer communicates clearly, reduction of exposure becomes the safest response. The presence reduces interaction not because conditions are hostile, but because clarity has diminished. This response runs counter to most instinctive behavior. Many creatures push forward when signals are ambiguous, exploiting opportunity until danger becomes unmistakable. They rely on reaction speed to compensate for late recognition. The desert punishes this strategy. Reaction speed matters only when options remain open. Once margins collapse, speed offers little advantage. Movement becomes costly. Retreat becomes constrained. The presence avoids this trap by acting when ambiguity appears, not when danger arrives. At this stage, the difference between safety and exposure is measured in timing rather than location. A place that is safe now may become lethal later. A route that remains viable for another hour may trap those who commit to it too long. The presence does not commit. Its pauses lengthen further. Stillness becomes the dominant state. When movement occurs, it is brief, controlled, and immediately followed by reassessment. This pattern does not emerge from fear. It emerges from calibration to uncertainty. The desert's signals have shifted from clear to ambiguous. That alone is sufficient reason to reduce risk. Elsewhere, activity continues in pockets. Some creatures misread the ambiguity as opportunity. They extend their range confident that conditions remain favorable. Their confidence is not unreasonable. Nothing has contradicted it yet. This is how losses accumulate. The desert rarely contradicts behavior immediately. It allows error to compound until correction becomes expensive. Those who rely on immediate feedback respond too late. The presence does not seek feedback. It responds to loss of signal fidelity. When the environment stops communicating clearly, it withdraws. This withdrawal is not absolute. It does not disappear entirely. It maintains minimal interaction enough to remain viable without accumulating cost. It stays within zones that permit gradual adjustment rather than sudden correction. This strategy is invisible until escalation arrives, only when the desert completes its shift. When stored heat resurfaces rapidly. When tolerance collapses, suddenly does the significance of this early doubt become clear. By then, many who ignored ambiguity will scramble to react. Their responses will be urgent, visible, costly. Options will be limited. Margins will be thin. The presence will not need to react. It will already be positioned within narrowing tolerance, having treated doubt as instruction rather than inconvenience. The desert does not reward certainty. It rewards caution in the absence of certainty. This moment where nothing feels wrong, yet nothing feels entirely right, is where survival diverges most sharply. Those who proceed as if conditions remain neutral accumulate unseen debt. Those who reduce exposure preserve flexibility. The presence chooses flexibility. Its behavior now reflects a commitment to minimizing future correction rather than maximizing present gain. This commitment is not dramatic. It does not announce itself through visible retreat or confrontation. It is expressed through restraint. The night continues. The air remains cool. The surface remains navigable. To most senses, the desert still feels unchanged, but alignment has already shifted. Those who misread this moment will not fail immediately. They will fail later when adjustment requires urgency, and urgency is no longer enough. The presence will remain, not because it predicted danger accurately, but because it treated uncertainty itself as a signal and responded before the desert demanded it. The change does not arrive with the sun. It begins earlier, quietly, while the sky is still dark enough to hide what is happening below. Stored heat starts to move. What settled into the ground during the day has not disappeared. It has only been delayed, held beneath layers of sand and stone, waiting for the moment when release becomes unavoidable. As the night advances, the balance that kept that heat contained begins to fail. The surface does not warm suddenly, it tightens. Energy migrates upward in slow, uneven pulses. Some areas release it sooner, others trap it longer, creating a patchwork of tolerance that shifts minute by minute. To human senses, these changes are imperceptible. The air still feels cool, the ground still appears stable, but the margin is collapsing. The desert has crossed from reorganization into escalation. At this stage, the environment no longer responds proportionally. Small increases in stored energy begin producing outsized effects. Heat that once dispersed gradually now accumulates near the surface. Cooling slows. Recovery windows shorten. The ground becomes deceptive. Places that felt neutral an hour ago now resist release, holding warmth longer than expected. Shallow depressions become reservoirs. Sheltered areas that once buffered temperature now trap it. The very features that provided protection earlier invert their function. This inversion is where danger sharpens. Movement now carries greater cost, even when it appears unchanged. Each step increases contact with surfaces that no longer dissipate heat efficiently. Exposure compounds faster than it did before, though the difference is subtle enough to escape notice. Most inhabitants respond late. Their senses register discomfort only after accumulation has already narrowed options. By the time urgency arrives, correction requires speed, and speed carries cost the environment no longer allows. The presence does not experience this shift as surprise. It has already reduced exposure to align with tightening margins, where others remain active. Assuming the night still offers neutrality, it remains controlled positioned where tolerance persists longest. The desert continues to escalate. Thermal gradients sharpen. Pressure shifts become more pronounced. The ground no longer absorbs disturbance passively. Vibrations travel differently now, dissipating less evenly. Sound flattens further, swallowed by an environment that has become dense with stored energy. This density is lethal, but not immediately. It restricts options first. Routes that once permitted safe traversal now demand correction midway. Movement that once felt efficient now drains energy rapidly. Recovery slows, then fails. The difference between survival and collapse is now measured in timing rather than strength. The desert does not single out the weak. It eliminates those who remain exposed when escalation completes. At this stage, panic still seems unnecessary. The air has not burned. The surface has not scorched. Many creatures misinterpret this delay as confirmation that their earlier assessment was correct. It is not. The delay is structural. The desert escalates through accumulation, not shock. By the time conditions become obviously hostile, tolerance has already been consumed. The presence remains aligned with this reality. It does not move to exploit the remaining window. It does not test how much exposure is still possible. It treats the narrowing margin as closed even before closure becomes absolute. This restraint appears excessive until escalation completes. Elsewhere, movement becomes erratic. Activity spikes briefly as creatures attempt to reposition, then drops sharply as cost overwhelms capacity. Shelters fill quickly, not all of them suitable for the conditions they now face. Some spaces concentrate heat faster than the open ground. Retreat into them accelerates collapse rather than preventing it. The desert does not distinguish between shelter and trap. It responds only to physics. The presence avoids these failures by having never relied on late retreat. It occupies positions chosen for gradual adjustment, not last-minute concealment. As heat continues to rise toward the surface, the environment's tolerance compresses further. Zones of viability shrink. The landscape becomes unevenly hostile. Movement is no longer optional, but reaction is no longer cheap. This is where survival usually fractures. Those who waited for clarity now face urgency. Their responses are fast, visible, costly. Every correction drains remaining reserves. Each attempt to escape compounds exposure. The presence does not respond because there is nothing new to respond to. It has been adjusting continuously, quietly, long before escalation demanded action. This is the difference between adaptation and endurance. Endurance absorbs stress until capacity fails. Adaptation avoids peak stress altogether. The desert favors the latter. As escalation advances, silence deepens. Not because life has vanished entirely, but because movement has become inefficient. Energy must be conserved. Interaction is minimized. The environment has entered its most unforgiving phase, not yet lethal, but decisive. What happens next will finalize outcomes set in motion hours earlier. Those who aligned early will remain within tolerance as conditions peak. Those who waited will find themselves exposed when correction is no longer possible. The presence remains where it is, not hidden, not dominant, just positioned within a margin that still exists for now. The desert continues to tighten, and with each passing moment, the cost of misjudgment becomes irreversible. Reaction arrives late, and when it does, it arrives loudly. As the desert tightens, movement elsewhere becomes uneven. What was once fluid turns abrupt. Paths that flowed naturally now break into starts and stops. Hesitation followed by bursts of urgency. The environment has shifted beyond neutrality, but many inhabitants only recognize this once correction becomes necessary. They respond when sensation finally catches up. Insects that moved freely across the surface begin to slow. Their trajectories lose consistency lines, breaking into arcs as heat lingers beneath their bodies longer than expected. Some reverse direction, suddenly abandoning routes they crossed minutes earlier. Others continue forward, committing to paths that no longer permit recovery. Small nocturnal animals emerge from shelter with confidence, then hesitate mid-movement. The ground resists them, now holding warmth that drains energy faster than anticipated. Their pauses lengthen. Breathing becomes visible in brief bursts of motion and stillness. These reactions are not mistakes. They are late. The desert has already redefined tolerance. What feels like a sudden change is merely the point at which accumulated cost becomes noticeable. By the time discomfort registers, the margin for cheap correction has vanished. Movement spikes briefly as urgency takes over. Creatures attempt to reposition, to reach shade, to find depth or elevation that promises relief. These attempts increase exposure rather than reduce it. Each additional step compounds heat transfer. Each pause traps warmth against the body. Shelter, once a solution, becomes uncertain. Burrows that cooled efficiently earlier now hold residual heat. Crevices that offered shade trap air that no longer circulates. Retreat into these spaces feels logical, but logic here follows outdated conditions. The desert does not update in stages, it inverts. Places that once reduced exposure now amplify it. Open ground that released heat earlier now radiates it upward. Movement that once provided cooling now accelerates depletion. Those who react late find themselves navigating a map that no longer matches their expectations. Their behavior reflects urgency rather than alignment. Paths are chosen quickly. Corrections happen repeatedly. Each adjustment costs more than the last. The environment does not respond with mercy. As reaction intensifies, the landscape begins to empty in patches. Some areas lose activity rapidly, not because life has disappeared entirely, but because movement there has become unsustainable. Other areas retain activity briefly, giving the illusion of refuge. This unevenness creates false hope. Creatures converge toward zones that appear tolerable, concentrating activity and compounding cost. Competition increases. Disturbance accumulates. Heat disperses less efficiently. What feels like safety accelerates collapse. The desert punishes convergence. Reaction-driven movement amplifies disturbance at precisely the moment when disturbance has become expensive. Vibrations travel differently now, interacting with stored heat rather than dissipating through cooler substrate. Sound flattens further, offering no feedback. Those reacting late lose their ability to read the environment accurately. Their senses report urgency but no longer offer guidance. Speed becomes counterproductive. Persistence becomes liability. Some attempt to endure reducing movement and waiting for conditions to stabilize. But stabilization is no longer possible within the current phase. The system has already crossed into escalation. Endurance now demands tolerance that has already been consumed. Others attempt escape, pushing into open ground in search of relief. This movement exposes them to surfaces that no longer release heat efficiently. Their correction overshoots, then stalls. The desert offers no clear solution at this stage. It does not reward effort. It rewards prior alignment. The presence is not among those reacting. It does not increase movement. It does not seek alternative shelter. It does not attempt to outrun the change. Its behavior remains unchanged because change has already been accounted for. This contrast becomes stark, where reaction creates noise, alignment produces silence. Where urgency scatters movement, preparation concentrates stillness. The desert responds accordingly. Areas of frantic activity collapse first. Energy drains rapidly where movement spikes. Recovery becomes impossible where correction is repeated. Areas of reduced interaction persist longer, not because conditions are better, but because cost has been minimized. Reaction reveals itself through excess movement, excess correction, excess confidence in solutions that no longer apply. The desert eliminates excess efficiently. As escalation continues, reaction-driven behavior becomes increasingly desperate. Movement loses coherence. Paths intersect unnecessarily. Shelter choices narrow. Some creatures disappear quietly, not through visible failure, but through gradual depletion. Others remain visible longer, their struggle evident in erratic movement and repeated correction. The desert does not differentiate between these outcomes. It responds only to energy balance. Those who reacted late are now bound by consequences set in motion earlier. Their options shrink with each attempt to fix what can no longer be fixed cheaply. The presence remains outside this cycle. It occupies positions that were chosen when choice still mattered. Its exposure remains low because it was reduced when reduction was still inexpensive. This difference in timing explains everything. Reaction is not inherently flawed. In many environments, reacting quickly to visible change is sufficient. The desert is not one of them. Here, reaction arrives after decision. By the time urgency is felt, the system has already decided who remains within tolerance. The night continues to advance. Heat continues to migrate. Tolerance continues to compress. Reaction-driven movement thins rapidly now, leaving behind pockets of stillness and absence. What remains is not what moved the fastest or tried the hardest, but what aligned earliest. The presence persists quietly within this thinning landscape, not as a victor, not as a survivor of last resort, but as a reminder that in environments governed by delayed consequence, the most dangerous moment is not when danger becomes visible, but when it first becomes ambiguous. Those who waited for certainty reacted too late. Those who treated uncertainty as instruction no longer need to react at all. Absence is rarely noticed immediately. It reveals itself only when something expected fails to appear. As escalation advances, the desert grows quieter, not uniformly, but selectively. Pockets of activity collapse first, followed by wider zones where movement thins into silence. What remains is not emptiness, but a rearranged presence life redistributed according to tolerance rather than opportunity. And in this rearrangement, one thing becomes apparent. The presence that once moved low across the sand is no longer visible. There is no dramatic retreat to observe. No hurried dash toward shelter. No trace of flight or concealment. The ground bears no marks that indicate where it went or when it left. It simply is not there. This absence does not feel sudden. It feels complete. Where movement once traced careful, deliberate paths, the surface now remains undisturbed. Where subtle adjustments once guided alignment, there is only stillness. The desert does not announce this disappearance. It absorbs it. For those still reacting elsewhere, The absence goes unnoticed. Their attention is consumed by urgency, by correction, by the narrowing of options. They do not look for what is already withdrawn. But for the environment, the absence matters. The desert responds differently to what is not present. Disturbance decreases. Vibration dissipates more evenly. Heat accumulates without interruption. The system continues its escalation without having to account for additional interaction. The presence has removed itself from the equation. This removal is not concealment in the traditional sense. It is not hiding from predators or retreating into a fixed refuge. It is disengagement and intentional reduction of interaction that began long before disappearance became necessary. The timing of this absence is critical. It does not coincide with peak heat. It does not align with visible collapse. It occurs earlier, at the point where escalation becomes irreversible, but not yet obvious. By withdrawing, then, the presence avoids the most costly phase entirely. Many creatures disappear only after they fail. Their absence marks loss. Bodies remain. Signs persist. The desert records their failure through residue. This absence leaves no such record. It is not the result of collapse. It is the result of alignment. The desert offers countless places to retreat, but few that remain viable through escalation. Shallow shelters trap heat. Deep refuges concentrated. Movement toward depth can be as dangerous as remaining exposed. The presence does not rely on a single location. Its disappearance does not imply confinement. It implies redistribution. Contact-minimized exposure, controlled interaction, reduced to the lowest possible level. This is why no trace remains. The desert does not reveal where the presence has gone, because it has not gone anywhere obvious. It has simply ceased to participate in the phase that eliminates most others. In the absence of movement, time behaves differently. Without disturbance, the ground releases heat according to its own structure, rather than in response to interaction. Gradients stabilize temporarily. The environment continues to tighten, but without the added cost of friction. The presence remains within this tightening system, but not as an active participant. This distinction between remaining present and remaining active determines outcome. Most creatures equate survival with activity. They move to find safety. They respond to threat through motion. In the desert, motion becomes liability once escalation begins. The presence abandons activity first. Its absence signals a transition from engagement to endurance, avoidance. Not endurance through tolerance, but endurance through exclusion, avoiding peak exposure altogether. Elsewhere, reaction-driven movement continues to collapse. Zones that held activity minutes earlier now fall silent. What remains is fragmented, unstable, expensive. The presence does not reappear to exploit this vacuum. It does not return to reclaim space or opportunity. It remains absent because absence is the strategy. The desert does not require constant presence to eliminate. It eliminates through timing, by withdrawing before escalation peaks. The presence allows the environment to complete its cycle. Without demanding endurance, it does not need to prove. This absence is easily misinterpreted. Observers might assume disappearance equals vulnerability. That retreat signals weakness, that the presence has been forced out by conditions it cannot withstand. The opposite is true. Those forced out leave traces. They fail visibly. Their absence is abrupt, marked by collapse or removal. This absence is quiet, clean, intentional. It does not occur at the height of danger, but at the moment danger becomes inevitable. The desert respects inevitability. By removing itself early, the presence preserves options. It can re-engage later when conditions reorganize and tolerance expands again. It does not gamble on endurance. It avoids the wager entirely. As escalation continues, the environment simplifies. What remains exposed grows fewer. Silence deepens. The absence persists. No movement returns to mark correction. No trace suggests reconsideration. The desert proceeds as if the presence was never part of this phase. And that is precisely the point. Survival here is not about proving capacity to endure extremes. It is about avoiding unnecessary participation in them. The presence understands this. Its absence is not disappearance in the sense of vanishing from the ecosystem. It is absence from a moment, absence from a phase designed to eliminate those who remain active too long. When conditions eventually relax, when heat disperses and tolerance widens again, re-engagement will be possible. The presence will return without fanfare, without sign that anything extraordinary occurred. But during escalation, absence is everything. The desert does not notice who survives. It notices who remains exposed. And in this phase, the presence is not among them. The climax does not arrive with motion. It arrives with stillness so complete that even absence feels heavy. By now, the desert has finished tightening. What remains is not chaos, but compression. Heat lingers close to the surface, no longer migrating freely. The air resists circulation. Recovery windows have closed. This is the phase that decides outcomes. There are no dramatic struggles to witness. No sudden collapses. No visible markers that signal failure in real time. The desert completes its work quietly through sustained conditions that tolerate no correction. Movement has become inefficient everywhere. Where activity persists, it does so briefly and at great cost. Each step drains more energy than it replaces. Each pause traps warmth longer than before. The environment no longer responds proportionally to effort. The desert has stopped negotiating. This is the moment many imagine as the peak of danger, a dramatic confrontation between life and environment. In reality, confrontation ended earlier. What happens now is resolution. The landscape settles into silence, not the silence of absence, but the silence of minimized interaction. Life remains present, but barely participating. The system has reached a state where engagement offers no advantage. In this stillness, the cost of movement becomes absolute. Those who remained active into this phase face a narrowing corridor of options. Correction requires motion, but motion accelerates depletion. Retreat promises relief, but shelters invert into traps. Endurance demands tolerance that has already been consumed. There is no favorable choice left. This is why the climax feels static. The desert does not erupt, it holds. Heat continues to press upward, not dramatically, but persistently. The ground releases energy in a sustained output that prevents cooling. The air absorbs it slowly, retaining warmth instead of dispersing it. The system has stabilized into hostility. Nothing changes now in ways that matter. This is as bad as it will get. Those who are still exposed cannot wait it out. Those who attempt to endure will fail quietly without spectacle. Those who attempt to escape will exhaust themselves in the attempt. The desert does not require action to eliminate. It requires only time. This is the moment the presence has avoided entirely. Its absence is now complete. Not just unseen, but irrelevant to the system's operation. The desert escalates without accounting for it. There is no disturbance to alter gradients, no interaction to redistribute heat. The environment proceeds uninterrupted. This absence creates contrast. Where reaction-driven behavior has collapsed into stillness out of necessity, the presence's stillness is elective. It does not endure this phase. It bypasses it. This difference is subtle but decisive. The desert favors those who do not ask it to test their limits. As the climax holds, the landscape becomes uniform in its hostility. Earlier variations flatten. Micro-habitats that once offered marginal relief lose distinction. Everything converges toward the same level of intolerance. At this point, survival is no longer about position, it is about timing. Those who aligned early are not present to be tested. Those who waited are now trapped within the test. The desert completes its selection without noise. This is why observers often misunderstand desert mortality. They expect drama, frantic movement, visible collapse, sudden failure. What they find instead is quiet disappearance, gradual thinning, unexplained absence. The climax produces no spectacle because spectacle is inefficient. Elimination here is procedural. The environment applies pressure uniformly until only those who avoided exposure remain viable. There is no reward for persistence at this stage. There is no recovery for those who misjudged earlier. The desert does not escalate further because it does not need to. This is sufficient. Time stretches, Minutes feel indistinct. Without movement to mark progression, the phase feels suspended. But it is not static. Energy continues to flow upward. Heat continues to accumulate. Tolerance continues to erode. Those still present experience this erosion as exhaustion without effort, as loss without struggle. There is nothing to respond to. Reaction has lost relevance. This is the essence of the desert's most lethal phase. Not sudden danger, but sustained inevitability. Survival cannot be achieved here through action. It can only be preserved by not being here at all. The presence understood this earlier. Its withdrawal was not an escape from danger, but an escape from irrelevance. By removing itself from the phase where action ceases to matter, it preserved viability without contest. The climax resolves nothing visibly. There is no turning point within it. Outcomes were decided before it began. When this phase finally loosens, when heat disperses and tolerance slowly widens again, what remains will re-emerge. Movement will return cautiously. Activity will resume unevenly, but the cost will already have been paid. Those who endured this phase did so not because they were stronger, but because they were absent. Those who remained present paid through depletion, some fatally, others narrowly. The desert will not record these outcomes. There will be no trace of struggle, no marker of victory or loss. Only the quiet reappearance of life where tolerance allows it and continued absence where it does not. This is the climax the desert delivers, not a moment of action, but a moment where action is no longer useful, where silence becomes the final condition, and where survival belongs not to those who faced the peak, but to those who stepped aside before the peak demanded proof. The cost does not announce itself with collapse. It accumulates quietly, measured not in moments of failure, but in margins that were spent too freely when they still seemed abundant. By the time escalation loosens its grip, the desert has already taken inventory. What remains visible is not the full record of loss. The environment does not display consequences clearly. There are no markers to indicate which decisions proved fatal and which merely reduced future tolerance. The desert erases evidence efficiently, but absence tells the story. Where movement once existed, there is now stillness that does not resolve. Areas that should repopulate after the peak remain empty longer than expected. Activity returns unevenly, favoring zones that were vacated early, rather than those that endured longest. This delay reveals the cost of timing. Those who reacted late did not always die during escalation. Many survived the peak itself, enduring through stillness, conserving energy as best they could. But survival through the peak does not guarantee viability afterward. The desert's penalty is deferred. Energy depleted during escalation does not recover immediately. Systems pushed beyond efficiency take time to stabilize, and some never do. What looks like survival is often only prolonged failure. Movement resumes cautiously where tolerance allows, but it is reduced, tentative, uneven. Some creatures reappear briefly, then vanish again. Their capacity to re-engage has been compromised. This is the hidden cost of delay. Those who waited to adjust spent their margin during escalation. They paid in accumulated heat, depleted reserves, compromised positioning. Even if they endured, they emerge diminished. The desert does not offer compensation. Recovery here is slow, conditional, and selective. Only those who preserved margin before escalation retain the ability to exploit post-peak conditions. Others remain constrained. Their movements are shorter now. Pauses extend. Routes narrow. The environment that once felt navigable no longer offers flexibility. Options have collapsed, not because conditions remain hostile, but because capacity has been reduced. This reduction is subtle. There are no visible injuries to mark it. No dramatic failures. Just a narrowing of possibility that persists long after the peak has passed. The desert's most effective punishment is this persistence. It does not end when conditions improve. It carries forward into subsequent cycles, compounding over time. Those who misjudged once are more vulnerable the next time escalation arrives. Delay breeds vulnerability. Some creatures attempt to compensate increasing activity when conditions allow trying to rebuild what was lost. This effort carries cost of its own. Energy spent on recovery reduces reserve available for the next cycle. The desert favors those who never had to recover. Those who aligned early avoided this deficit entirely. They reappear with capacity intact, able to exploit renewed tolerance fully. Their movements regain range, their options widen. This difference reshapes the ecosystem quietly. Over time, areas become associated with viability, not because they were safest during the peak, but because they were vacated early. Places that seemed tolerable at the height of escalation become less favorable afterward, not due to lingering heat, but due to depleted inhabitants. The desert remembers behavior through outcome. This memory is not stored in the ground, but in distribution. Life reorganizes itself, according to what survived with margin, rather than what endured without it. The cost of delay is therefore not singular. It is cumulative. Each late adjustment reduces future alignment. Each cycle compounds error until persistence becomes impossible. This is why desert mortality is often misunderstood. Observers search for moments of death, the hour of peak heat, the moment of collapse, the visible struggle. What they overlook is the long tail of consequence that follows misjudgment. Most losses occur after the peak. They occur when recovery fails, when diminished capacity cannot support renewed engagement, when alignment remains off by degrees that no longer feel dramatic but prove decisive. The desert rarely kills outright. It degrades. Those who adjusted late may survive the crisis, but they do not survive the pattern. The presence avoided this cost entirely. By withdrawing before escalation demanded endurance, it preserved its reserve. It did not pay through depletion. It did not emerge compromised. When conditions loosened, it re-entered with full capacity. This is not luck. It is the result of timing that prioritizes preservation over proof. The desert does not value demonstration of toughness. It values continuity of function. Those who maintain function across cycles persist. Those who exhaust function to endure one cycle disappear later. The cost of delay thus extends beyond the immediate event. It shapes future viability. Creatures that reacted late now face each subsequent escalation with less margin. Their tolerance shrinks faster. Their recovery slows further. Eventually, a cycle arrives. They cannot survive, not because conditions are worse, but because capacity has already been eroded. This erosion is invisible until it is complete. The desert does not warn when a threshold has been crossed permanently. It allows repetition until elimination becomes inevitable. The presence exists outside this erosion. It does not accumulate deficit. It does not require recovery. Its survival strategy avoids expenditure rather than compensating for it later. This distinction determines longevity. As activity resumes gradually across the landscape, the difference becomes apparent. Some areas recover quickly, repopulated by those who preserved margin. Others remain sparse, not because conditions are still harsh, but because inhabitants no longer have the capacity to return. The desert has already moved on. Its cycle continues indifferent to who paid and who did not. The next escalation will arrive regardless. Those who delayed once are now closer to failure than they appear. The cost has been set, and in the desert, costs are never forgiven, only deferred. Life in the desert survives on margins so thin, they rarely reveal themselves until they are gone. From a distance, persistence here can appear resilient, even robust. Creatures emerge after the peak. Movement returns. Activity resumes. The surface looks alive again, suggesting recovery, suggesting balance, restored. But this impression is fragile. Desert life does not exist with surplus. It operates within narrow tolerances, where stability is borrowed rather than owned. Every function, movement, feeding, rest depends on conditions aligning just enough to allow continuation. There is no buffer. What remains after escalation is not a reset. It is a recalibration to reduced capacity, a quieter phase where survival depends on how much margin was preserved before conditions turned hostile. This is where fragility becomes apparent. Creatures that endured the peak but spent too much during it now operate close to failure. Their movements shorten. Their activity windows narrow. Their capacity to respond to change diminishes. They are alive, but constrained. The desert does not immediately claim them, it waits. Each subsequent shift, each rise in temperature, each tightening of tolerance pushes against capacity that has already been reduced. What once required minor adjustment now demands correction that costs too much. Fragility here is not weakness, it is exposure to accumulation. The desert applies pressure repeatedly, not catastrophically. Survival depends not on resisting one extreme, but on maintaining function across many cycles. Those who lose margin early become vulnerable later, often far from the moment they misjudged. This delayed vulnerability is difficult to see. From the outside, the landscape appears unchanged. The same species reappear, the same routes are used. But beneath this familiarity, capacity has shifted. The desert ecosystem is constantly thinning, not through dramatic die-offs, but through gradual reduction in participation. Some individuals engage less frequently, others withdraw entirely. The system simplifies quietly. This simplification is not random. It follows the contours of fragility. Life that depends on precise timing, narrow windows, or high expenditure becomes increasingly rare. Life that preserves margin, even at the cost of opportunity, becomes more common. The desert selects for restraint. What makes this process deceptive is its subtlety. There is no clear boundary between viability and collapse. Fragility increases incrementally, masked by continued survival. Many creatures remain alive long after their margin has disappeared. They function, but only under ideal conditions. When conditions deviate slightly, failure arrives quickly. The desert exploits this. It does not need to become more extreme to eliminate fragile life. It only needs to repeat itself. Each cycle applies the same pressure. Those with reduced capacity reach their limit sooner each time. This is why desert populations fluctuate unpredictably. Losses do not correspond neatly to peaks. They occur in waves often after conditions have improved. Fragile individuals disappear not during escalation, but during recovery when capacity proves insufficient to re-engage. This delayed loss confuses observation. Survival is often attributed to toughness, to endurance through extremes. But endurance alone does not explain persistence here. Many endure once. Few endure repeatedly. Fragility accumulates invisibly. Energy reserves do not replenish fully. Structural wear does not reverse completely. Behavioral flexibility narrows. The ability to adjust early declines. The desert does not compensate for this decline. Each cycle demands the same alignment. Those who cannot meet it are removed regardless of how long they have persisted before. The presence avoided this fragility by avoiding expenditure. It did not endure the peak. It bypassed it. By removing itself from the phase where fragility is created, it preserved capacity intact. This preservation matters more than any single act of survival. The desert does not reward those who survive one crisis. It rewards those who remain viable across many. Fragility is therefore the true cost of misjudgment, not immediate death, but erosion of future survival. This erosion reshapes behavior. Creatures operating near their limit become risk-averse in ways that reduce opportunity further. The reduced activity lowers intake, which further reduces capacity. A feedback loop forms quiet and self-reinforcing. Others take the opposite approach. Increasing activity to compensate for loss, this accelerates depletion. Both strategies converge toward elimination. The desert offers no third option. Only those who preserved margin before fragility set in retain flexibility. They can afford restraint without collapsing. They can afford engagement without overspending. This difference is invisible until it is decisive. From one cycle to the next, the ecosystem shifts subtly toward those who avoided fragility creation. Over time, this shift becomes structural. Species composition changes. Activity patterns evolve. The desert does not change. Life does. Fragility acts as a filter, removing those who operate too close to tolerance, regardless of how well they performed previously. Past success does not confer immunity. The presence remains outside this filter. Its strategy minimizes the creation of fragility rather than managing it afterward. It does not rely on recovery. It relies on avoidance of irreversible cost. This distinction determines longevity. As the desert prepares for its next escalation, fragility becomes fate. Those who accumulated it unknowingly will face the coming cycle with less margin than they realize. Their misalignment will reveal itself quickly. Those who preserved margin will adjust again early and quietly. The desert does not need to be harsher to eliminate fragile life. It only needs to remain consistent. Consistency is enough. And in a system where consistency outlasts endurance, fragility is the most dangerous condition of all. Within this landscape of erosion and constraint, the presence occupies a different position. It is not untouched by the desert's cycles. It is not immune to heat pressure or depletion. Its body does not resist extremes better than others. What separates it is not strength, but exposure. The presence does not survive because it endures more. It survives because it endures less. In the aftermath of escalation, when the desert relaxes only marginally, most life returns with caution. Movement is hesitant. Activity resumes in fragments. The environment allows engagement again, but not generously. The presence reappears without urgency. Its return is not a rebound from collapse, but a continuation of alignment. Where others re-enter depleted, it re-enters intact. Where others must ration movement to recover, it operates with capacity preserved. This difference is subtle but persistent. The presence does not rush to exploit renewed tolerance. It does not overextend to compensate for time lost. It resumes interaction, gradually matching the environment's pace rather than challenging it. This restraint prevents new fragility from forming. In contrast, those who endured the peak often re-engage aggressively, attempting to reclaim ground access resources or rebuild reserves quickly. Their urgency reflects deficit. Their behavior creates new cost. The presence does not carry such deficit. Its earlier withdrawal spared it from the phase where depletion accelerates uncontrollably. As a result, it does not need to recover from damage it never sustained. This preservation of capacity shapes everything that follows. Movement remains efficient. Pauses remain intentional rather than forced. Roots remain flexible. When conditions shift again, adjustment does not require urgency. The desert rewards this continuity. While others approach each cycle with reduced margin, the presence approaches each with nearly the same tolerance it had before. It does not accumulate fragility across cycles. It resets without paying the price most others do. This does not make it dominant. It does not expand unchecked. It does not displace others aggressively. Its population does not explode during favorable periods. It remains constrained by the same environment that constrains everything else. But it remains viable. In extreme systems, viability matters more than abundance. Persistence outweighs expansion. The desert favors what can remain functional under repetition, not what thrives briefly. The presence exemplifies this principle. Its strategy does not rely on predicting the future accurately. It relies on treating escalation as inevitable rather than conditional. By assuming that each cycle will tighten, it avoids commitment during phases where commitment becomes costly. This assumption proves reliable. The desert does not surprise those who expect it to be unforgiving. It surprises those who assume mercy where none exists. The presence does not test the environment's limits. It does not attempt to measure how much exposure it can tolerate. It does not gamble on endurance. It operates as if limits are fixed and unforgiving, even when conditions appear lenient. This approach minimizes error. Error in the desert is cumulative. One misjudgment rarely kills outright. It erodes capacity. Repeated erosion leads to failure. The presence avoids erosion by reducing participation in phases that generate it. This avoidance does not remove it from the ecosystem. It remains integrated, interacting when conditions allow, withdrawing when alignment deteriorates. Its survival is dynamic, not static. Observers often misinterpret this pattern as caution bordering on vulnerability. They expect survival to involve confrontation, endurance, visible struggle. But the desert does not require struggle. It requires timing. Those who struggle often do so because they arrived late to alignment. Those who align early struggle less because they avoid being tested. The presence belongs to the latter group. Its role in the desert ecosystem is therefore not defined by what it does, but by what it avoids. It avoids peak exposure. It avoids unnecessary movement. It avoids commitment to conditions that will soon invert. This avoidance shapes population structure quietly. Over time, areas where the presence operates maintain continuity. Activity remains stable. Interactions persist across cycles. In contrast, areas dominated by reaction-driven behavior experience fluctuation, collapse, and reorganization. The desert becomes patchy in its viability. This patchiness is not random. It reflects accumulated alignment. The presence contributes to this pattern by persisting where others thin out, not by competing directly, but by outlasting the cycles that remove others. This persistence is not absolute. It is conditional. The presence still depends on precise calibration. A misjudgment here would carry cost. But its strategy reduces the likelihood of such misjudgment by treating escalation as a certainty rather than a possibility. This mindset, if it can be called that, is embedded in behavior rather than cognition. The presence does not decide to withdraw. Withdrawal is the default when alignment weakens. This default protects capacity. As cycles repeat, this protection compounds. While others accumulate fragility across events, the presence maintains a flatter trajectory. Its survival curve remains relatively stable. This stability is rare in extreme environments. It is not achieved through resistance, but through selective absence. The desert does not punish absence, it punishes exposure. By understanding this, the present secures a future in a system that offers no guarantees. When the next escalation arrives, and it will, the pattern will repeat. Early reduction, quiet withdrawal, preservation of capacity, re-engagement without deficit. The desert will not notice this repetition. It does not track individuals or strategies. It responds only to physics and time, but the outcome will be the same. Those who align early will remain viable. Those who delay will accumulate fragility. Some will disappear immediately. Others will fade over subsequent cycles. The presence will continue, not because it is exceptional, but because it refuses to participate in phases where exceptionality is tested. In the desert, survival is not proven by endurance under peak conditions. It is proven by not needing to prove endurance at all. Not all information announces itself. Some signals never cross the threshold of human perception. They do not arrive as sound, heat, or motion. They exist beneath awareness, shaping outcomes long before they can be measured. The desert is filled with these signals. They move slowly. They accumulate. They alter conditions without drawing attention. By the time they manifest as discomfort or danger, their work has already been done. The presence appears tuned to this hidden layer. It does not respond to the desert as it looks or feels. It responds to how the desert is changing beneath those impressions. The difference lies not in sensitivity to extremes, but in sensitivity to transition. Most life reads the environment through direct feedback. Heat is felt, resistance is encountered, discomfort triggers adjustment. These cues are reliable in many ecosystems. In the desert, they arrive too late. Here, the most decisive changes occur before sensation shifts. Pressure redistributes subtly. Thermal gradients drift. The substrate alters how it absorbs and releases energy. None of this produces immediate warning. These are invisible signals. They do not indicate danger directly. They indicate direction, whether the environment is moving toward tolerance or away from it. The presence behaves as if it can read that direction. Its adjustments align with changes that are not yet threatening, only indicative. It responds when the system begins to lean, not when it falls. This distinction matters. The desert does not flip suddenly from safe to lethal. It slides. It drifts. It accumulates imbalance until correction becomes impossible. Those who wait for clear danger respond after the slide has already progressed. Invisible signals mark the beginning of that slide. They exist in the way heat lingers beneath the surface, in how quickly it dissipates or fails to. They appear in pressure differentials too small to feel, but large enough to alter how vibration travels through sand and stone. They exist in the ground itself. The desert floor is not inert. It responds continuously to changes in energy. During the day, it absorbs heat unevenly. At night, it releases that heat at different rates depending on composition, compaction, and moisture. These differences create a living map of tolerance. Most creatures cannot read this map until it becomes hostile. They move freely across it, unaware of how quickly its properties are shifting. The presence moves as if it is reading something else entirely. Its behavior suggests awareness of gradients that do not register as sensation. It avoids areas where the ground retains energy longer, even when surface temperature feels identical. It favors routes where dissipation remains efficient, even when they offer no visible advantage. These choices imply access to information that is not obvious. This information does not require cognition. It does not require prediction. It requires only alignment with cues that exist below conscious awareness. The desert produces countless such cues. Minute pressure changes ripple outward as heat migrates. Subtle vibrations pass through the substrate as materials expand and contract. These vibrations are not noise. They carry structure. They reflect how energy is moving. Most life ignores them. The presence does not. It behaves as if these signals are meaningful, not as warnings, but as indicators of trend. Where energy is concentrating, where tolerance is shrinking, where future conditions will become costly. This is not foresight. It is sensitivity to transition. Humans often assume that awareness requires complexity, that recognizing danger early demands advanced cognition or predictive reasoning. The desert undermines this assumption. Here, the earliest warnings are not conceptual. They are physical. They exist as patterns embedded in the environment itself. Life that persists here does not interpret these patterns. It aligns with them. The presence does not need to know what will happen. It only needs to know which direction the system is moving. That information is encoded in signals most observers overlook because they do not announce themselves. They do not demand attention. The desert is filled with changes that matter only later. Heat redistribution that feels irrelevant now. Pressure shifts that do not affect comfort. Ground vibrations that carry no immediate meaning. These are the signals that decide survival. Those who wait for consequence respond too late. Those who respond to cause avoid consequence entirely. The presence belongs to the latter. Its behavior reflects a relationship with the environment that is not reactive, but responsive. It adjusts to drift rather than shock. It moves when balance begins to tip, not when collapse becomes obvious. This responsiveness is subtle enough to be mistaken for coincidence. But its consistency across conditions suggests otherwise. Invisible signals are reliable precisely because they are quiet. They are not influenced by urgency or panic. They change slowly, reflecting structural shifts rather than surface noise. The desert communicates through these signals constantly. Most life hears only the loudest messages: heat, thirst, exhaustion. By then, the conversation is already over. The presence listens earlier. It does not require clarity. It requires trend. When the environment begins moving toward intolerance, the presence reduces exposure. When it moves back toward balance, engagement resumes cautiously. This pattern repeats across cycles. The signals themselves remain unmeasured. They are not cataloged. They are not labeled. But they exist embedded in the desert's physics. The presence does not decode them consciously. It does not need to. Its behavior has been shaped to respond automatically, without deliberation, without delay. This automaticity is survival's greatest advantage here. The desert does not offer time for interpretation. It offers only alignment. Those who wait to understand respond too late. Those who respond without needing to understand persist. Invisible signals are therefore not mysterious in the sense of being unknowable. They are mysterious because they do not conform to how humans expect warnings to appear. They are not alarms, they are gradients. The presence lives within these gradients. It adjusts not because danger is present, but because direction has changed. That single distinction separates survival from endurance, persistence from depletion. The desert does not reward awareness of danger. It rewards awareness of change. And in a landscape where the most important signals never announce themselves, survival belongs to those who move before movement seems necessary. Pressure is rarely felt when it changes slowly. It announces itself only when the shift becomes abrupt enough to push against the body. By then, it has already altered the environment in ways that cannot be reversed easily. In the desert, pressure changes constantly. Not the dramatic swings measured by storms or fronts, but micro-adjustments created by heat migration, ground expansion, and air settling unevenly across the surface. These changes are subtle. They do not register as discomfort. They do not alter breathing. They do not demand attention, and yet they matter. As heat stored beneath the sand begins to move upward, it displaces air in slow, distributed patterns. The ground expands microscopically. Pockets of denser air form near the surface, while lighter air rises unevenly above them. The result is a shifting mosaic of micro-pressure zones that drift across the landscape. To human senses, this is nothing. To the desert's physics, it is direction. Pressure gradients reveal where energy is accumulating and where it is dispersing. They mark zones that will soon resist cooling and areas that will release heat more efficiently. They precede temperature change rather than follow it. This makes them valuable signals. The presence behaves as if it responds to these gradients long before they become measurable by conventional means. Its movement adjusts not when heat is felt, but when the ground-air relationship begins to change. This is the core of the hypothesis. Not that the presence predicts the future, but that it reacts to present conditions that indicate where the environment is heading. Micropressure changes do not announce danger. They announce imbalance. As the desert transitions from reorganization into escalation, pressure near the ground becomes less uniform. Some areas resist compression, others yield slightly. These differences alter how vibration travels, how contact feels at the smallest scale. Life that remains in constant contact with the ground is exposed to this information continuously. Every step becomes a reading. The presence maintains low distributed contact with the surface. Its body spreads pressure rather than concentrating it. This contact pattern may allow it to detect changes in resistance that indicate underlying shifts in energy distribution. The desert floor is not passive. It responds to heat by expanding and contracting, by stiffening and relaxing. These responses affect how pressure is transferred through the substrate. Where heat accumulates, resistance changes. Where dissipation improves, resistance relaxes. These differences are minute but consistent. The presence appears to respond to them without hesitation. It alters direction where resistance subtly increases. It shortens contact where pressure feels different, even when temperature remains unchanged. This behavior suggests sensitivity not to heat itself, but to how the environment is beginning to handle heat. That distinction matters. By the time temperature rises enough to feel pressure patterns have already shifted significantly. Responding to heat is late. Responding to pressure is early. The desert does not require organisms to feel pain to signal danger. It signals through physics first. Micropressure changes propagate quietly across the ground as escalation begins. They do not move uniformly. They pool. They drift. They create corridors of relative tolerance and zones of increasing cost. The presence navigates these corridors as if they are visible. Its path avoids areas where pressure patterns indicate upcoming accumulation. It favors zones where release remains possible. These choices appear consistent across varying conditions, suggesting reliance on information that remains reliable, despite surface variability. This reliability is key. Temperature fluctuates quickly with wind and cloud cover. Pressure patterns tied to substrate behavior change more slowly. They provide a steadier indication of where the system is moving. The presence aligns with that steadiness. Critically, this alignment does not require conscious interpretation. Sensitivity to pressure does not need to be conceptual. It can be embedded in mechanoreception, the ability to detect resistance, vibration, and force through contact. Such sensitivity is common among organisms that live close to the ground. In the desert, mechanoreception may offer earlier access to environmental change than thermoreception. Heat takes time to reach the surface. Pressure patterns shift as soon as energy begins to migrate. This timing advantage explains much. The presence reduces exposure before heat becomes a problem, because it responds to pressure imbalance rather than thermal discomfort. Its withdrawal appears anticipatory only because the signal it responds to precedes the signal most observers recognize. This reframes the mystery. The question is not how the presence knows what will happen. It is how it responds to what is already happening, just not yet obvious. Micropressure changes are not warnings. They are consequences in motion. By the time they are felt by human instruments, escalation is already underway. By the time they are felt by human bodies, it is too late to respond cheaply. The presence operates earlier in this chain. Its behavior suggests a relationship with the ground that prioritizes feedback from resistance and vibration over feedback from heat. It reacts to the environment's structural response rather than its sensory output. This relationship is difficult to observe directly because it produces no spectacle. There is no visible moment where pressure shifts announce themselves. There is no sound, no movement, no clear sign that could be pointed to as cause. Only alignment reveals it. The presence changes direction where pressure patterns indicate tightening. It pauses where resistance increases unexpectedly. It withdraws when ground contact no longer feels permissive, even if surface conditions remain unchanged. These adjustments accumulate. Over time, they guide the presence away from zones that will soon become hostile, long before hostility manifests. This is not foresight. It is immediacy at a scale humans overlook. Micropressure does not tell the future. It tells the present at a resolution most senses cannot detect. The desert communicates through this resolution constantly. Those who can respond to it early avoid being tested later. Those who cannot wait for clearer signals. By then, escalation has already consumed margin. The hypothesis of micropressure sensitivity does not require extraordinary abilities. It requires only that the presence prioritizes information most organisms ignore. In a system governed by delayed consequence, early information is decisive. Pressure shifts first, heat follows. The presence responds where others wait. And in the desert, waiting is the most expensive choice of all. Heat is not only felt, it is emitted. Long before the desert becomes hot enough to burn, it begins to radiate energy upward from the ground. This radiation does not announce itself as discomfort. It does not register as pain or urgency. It exists as a constant exchange between surface and air, invisible, yet continuous. This exchange begins hours before escalation becomes obvious. During the day, the desert absorbs solar energy unevenly. Sandstone and compacted soil store heat at different depths and rates. When night falls, that energy does not disappear. It rises back toward the surface, slowly releasing itself as thermal radiation. This radiation is not uniform. Some areas emit more energy earlier. Others retain heat longer and release it later. The result is a shifting mosaic of thermal output that changes minute by minute, even when air temperature appears stable. Humans experience this only when it becomes intense enough to feel. But radiation exists long before sensation. The presence behaves as if it responds to this early emission. Its movement avoids areas where ground radiation increases subtly, even when the surface does not feel warm. It reduces contact where emission rises, shortening exposure without waiting for discomfort to justify adjustment. This suggests sensitivity not to heat itself, but to the direction and rate of heat flow. Radiation is directional. It reveals where energy is leaving the ground and where it is still accumulating below. Areas with increasing upward radiation indicate that deeper layers are beginning to release stored heat. These areas will become hostile later, not immediately. Responding to radiation is therefore early response. Most organisms rely on thermoreception, the feeling of heat at the surface. This is reliable in environments where heat arrives quickly and uniformly. In the desert, it arrives late and unevenly. By the time heat is felt, radiation has been active for hours. The presence appears to treat radiation as information. Its behavior aligns with areas where thermal emission remains low or stable. It avoids zones where emission increases even if surface temperature has not yet changed noticeably. This alignment suggests access to a signal humans rarely consider. Thermal radiation does not need to be intense to matter. Even small increases alter the energy balance of organisms in contact with the ground. They affect how quickly heat accumulates within the body, how efficiently it can be dissipated, and how much exposure remains tolerable. These effects compound over time. A slight increase in radiation that may be insignificant over minutes. Over hours, it becomes decisive. The desert operates on this scale. The presence reduces exposure when radiation trends upward, not when heat becomes intolerable. This timing difference explains much of its apparent foresight. It is not waiting to feel pain. It is responding to energy flow. The ground communicates its future through radiation. Areas that begin emitting earlier are announcing that deeper heat has started moving. Once that movement begins, it cannot be stopped quickly. Escalation is inevitable. The presence treats this inevitability seriously. It does not attempt to exploit the remaining window. It withdraws from zones where radiation indicates future hostility, even when those zones still appear safe. This behavior appears conservative, even wasteful of opportunity. But the desert punishes opportunism that ignores trajectory. Thermal radiation also interacts with the air above the ground, altering microcurrents and affecting how heat is dispersed. Areas with increased emission create pockets of warm air that linger near the surface, reducing cooling efficiency. These pockets are difficult to detect by touch, especially at night. But they influence how long an organism can remain exposed without accumulating heat internally. The presence behaves as if it detects these pockets indirectly. Its pauses shorten in radiative zones. Its contact becomes intermittent. Its path bends away from areas where emission disrupts dissipation, even when surface conditions look identical. This suggests sensitivity to how the environment is handling heat, not just how hot it feels. Radiation is therefore not a threat, it is a message. It tells the desert which areas are about to invert from tolerable to hostile. It announces escalation before escalation becomes visible. Humans rarely pay attention to radiation unless it becomes extreme. Instruments can measure it, but interpretation requires context. In the desert, by the time radiation is measured, as dangerous options are already limited. The presence does not measure, it aligns. This alignment does not require awareness of cause. It requires only that behavior responds to subtle changes in energy exchange. The desert favors this responsiveness. Life that waits for heat to be felt responds too late. Life that responds to radiation avoids the peak entirely. This distinction reframes survival. It is not about tolerating heat. It is about avoiding accumulation. The presence does not endure high radiation. It avoids being present when radiation rises significantly. Its withdrawal coincides with the early phase of emission, not with the peak. This timing is critical. By the time thermal radiation saturates the surface, and air withdrawal is no longer cheap. Endurance becomes the only option, and endurance here is costly. The presence avoids that cost. Its behavior suggests that radiation patterns guide its decisions quietly, without dramatic response. It does not flee radiation, it drifts away from it early. This drift is slow, deliberate, and consistent. Across nights with different conditions, the same pattern emerges. Areas that later become hotspots are avoided earlier. Areas that remain radiatively stable are favored longer. This consistency strengthens the hypothesis. Radiation does not fluctuate randomly. It follows predictable patterns based on substrate composition depth and prior heat absorption. These patterns repeat with variation. The presence aligns with repetition rather than anomaly. It does not need to predict exact outcomes. It only needs to recognize when energy flow begins moving in an unfavorable direction. This recognition does not require extraordinary perception. It requires sensitivity to gradients that exist below human awareness. The desert communicates through gradients constantly. Pressure, radiation, vibration all shift before danger arrives. The presence responds to these shifts early. Thermal radiation is one of the clearest early indicators of escalation. It reveals where the system is releasing stored energy and where that release will concentrate later. By responding to radiation rather than temperature, the presence avoids being tested by extremes. This avoidance is mistaken for endurance. In reality, it is refusal. Refusal to remain present when the desert begins its most unforgiving phase. The presence does not conquer heat. It sidesteps it. And in a landscape where heat kills through accumulation rather than shock sidestepping is the most reliable form of survival there is. The desert is never truly still. Even in silence, it vibrates. Beneath the surface, energy moves continuously. Heat expands materials. Cooling contracts them. Air shifts through porous layers of sand and stone. Each movement produces minute oscillations, background vibrations that never fully disappear. Most of these oscillations are too weak to be felt consciously. They do not resemble sound. They do not announce themselves as disturbance. They exist as a low-level hum embedded in the ground itself. This hum changes before the desert becomes hostile. As stored heat begins migrating upward, the physical properties of the substrate shift. Expansion alters density. Contraction changes tension. The way vibrations travel through the ground subtly reorganizes. This reorganization happens early, long before heat reaches the surface. The desert's vibrational signature begins to drift. Frequencies shift slightly. Transmission becomes less uniform. Areas that once absorbed oscillation begin reflecting it. Others dampen it more effectively. These changes are not noise, they are structure. The presence behaves as if it is sensitive to this structure. Its movement avoids areas where background oscillation becomes irregular, even when no visible change has occurred. It pauses where vibration patterns feel inconsistent. It redirects when the ground no longer transmits energy in familiar ways. This behavior suggests awareness of the desert's baseline rhythm. Life that remains in constant contact with the ground is exposed to vibration continuously. Every step, every pause, every moment of stillness includes feedback from the substrate. Changes in how that feedback feels may indicate shifts in the environment long before other cues emerge. This is the core of the hypothesis, not that the presence hears vibrations, but that it experiences changes in stability, resonance, and resistance through contact. These changes reflect how the desert is reorganizing internally. When heat begins to move upward, the ground's mechanical behavior changes. Expansion creates microfractures in compacted layers. Pressure redistributes. Tension builds unevenly. Vibrations travel differently through these altered structures. The desert's rhythm loses coherence. For organisms attuned to contact-based feedback, this loss of coherence is information. It does not mean danger yet. It means transition. The presence appears to respond to transition rather than threat. When oscillation becomes uneven, when the ground no longer behaves predictably. Under contact, the presence reduces exposure. It limits movement. It avoids commitment to areas where vibration suggests instability. This response occurs before escalation becomes visible. By the time temperature rises or radiation intensifies, vibrational patterns have already shifted significantly. Responding to vibration is therefore earlier than responding to heat. The desert signals its future through mechanics first. Most organisms ignore this signal. Their interaction with the ground is intermittent or secondary. They rely on site temperature or air movement signals that arrive later. The presence prioritizes contact. Its low-profile distributed contact and continuous interaction with the substrate may allow it to detect changes in oscillation that others cannot. Not consciously, but functionally. The ground begins to feel different, not warmer, not dangerous, just less reliable. In an environment where reliability determines survival, this difference matters. Background oscillation also reflects activity elsewhere in the system. As movement collapses in some areas and concentrates in others, vibrational patterns change accordingly. Zones of frantic activity become noisy. Zones of withdrawal become quiet. The presence avoids noise. It does not move toward areas of increased vibration, even when those areas suggest opportunity. It does not investigate disturbance. It withdraws from it. This behavior reduces exposure to zones where escalation is already underway. The desert's vibrational field is therefore not only a reflection of physics, but of biology. It encodes where interaction remains viable and where it has become costly. By responding to this field, the presence avoids areas that will soon collapse. This avoidance is subtle. There is no visible reaction, no sudden flight, just gradual redirection, shortening of paths, reduction of contact. Over time, these small adjustments guide the presence away from the center of escalation. The hypothesis of oscillation sensitivity does not require exceptional perception. It requires only that behavior responds to mechanical feedback that exists below the threshold of conscious awareness. Such feedback is common in organisms that rely on tactile information. In the desert, tactile information arrives earlier than thermal or visual information. The presence's strategy may therefore be less mysterious than it appears. It is not predicting danger. It is responding to the desert's internal reorganization as it happens. Vibration does not lie. It reflects changes in structure immediately. Heat and radiation take time to become perceptible. Pressure gradients drift slowly. Oscillation shifts as soon as materials begin to change state. This immediacy gives vibration unique value as an early signal. The presence appears to use that value. Its withdrawal coincides with moments when the desert's baseline rhythm becomes unstable. It avoids being present when oscillation indicates that escalation is inevitable. This explains why its absence precedes visible danger. It is not leaving because conditions are bad. It is leaving because conditions are changing. The desert does not kill through sudden shock. It kills through sustained imbalance. Oscillation is the earliest marker of that imbalance. Life that responds to oscillation avoids being tested by the outcome. The presence embodies this principle. Its behavior aligns with a world understood not through sight or sensation, but through contact and rhythm. It moves with the desert when the desert is balanced and withdraws when the rhythm breaks. This relationship is quiet, unremarkable, and easily overlooked, but it is consistent. Across nights, across conditions, across variations in temperature and wind, the same pattern holds. Withdrawal begins when oscillation destabilizes, not when heat becomes intolerable. This consistency strengthens the hypothesis. The desert communicates its future through mechanics first. Those who listen early do not need to endure later. The presence listens without listening. It does not interpret, it responds. And in a landscape where response must precede awareness to remain viable, sensitivity to the ground's silent rhythm may be the most reliable advantage of all. Science prefers clarity. It searches for mechanisms that can be isolated, measured, repeated. It builds explanations by narrowing variables until cause and effect align cleanly. The desert resists this approach. What happens here unfolds across layers that do not separate neatly. Pressure, radiation, vibration, and heat interact continuously, influencing one another in ways that blur boundaries. No single signal acts alone. No single mechanism explains survival in full. This complexity is where certainty dissolves. Researchers can measure temperature. They can track pressure. They can record vibration. They can model heat flow through sand and stone. Each dataset offers insight, but none capture the whole picture. The presence exists within that gap. Its behavior suggests sensitivity to multiple signals operating simultaneously, not reliance on a single cue. When withdrawal begins, it does not correspond perfectly to any one measurable threshold. It occurs earlier than thermal danger, earlier than visible escalation, earlier than most instruments would flag concern. This timing challenges explanation. If the presence responded only to pressure, then pressure alone should predict its behavior. If radiation were the key, thermal emission should provide a reliable trigger. If vibration-dominated oscillation patterns should align consistently with withdrawal. They do not, at least not in isolation. The desert does not change one variable at a time. It shifts systems together. Pressure gradients adjust as heat migrates. Radiation alters air movement. Vibration reflects both physical change and biological activity. The presence appears to respond to the convergence, not the components. This convergence is difficult to study. Scientific methods excel at separating signals. Desert survival may depend on integrating them. Integration does not leave clean traces. It produces behavior that looks anticipatory because it responds to trends rather than thresholds. Trends are harder to define. They exist as direction rather than magnitude, as drift rather than spike. Instruments are built to detect extremes. The presence responds to beginnings. This mismatch complicates explanation. Another challenge lies in scale. Many of the signals, hypothesized to guide the presence, operate below the resolution of common measurement tools. Micro-pressure shifts, low-amplitude vibrations, slight changes in radiative balance. These are detectable in controlled settings, but difficult to map across open terrain in real time. The desert is vast. Signals are local. Capturing them requires dense instrumentation that alters the environment simply by being present. Measuring vibration requires contact. Measuring radiation requires exposure. Measuring pressure requires stabilization. Each measurement interferes. The presence operates without interference. Its behavior emerges from direct interaction unmediated by tools that simplify or distort. This creates a paradox. The more scientists attempt to isolate the mechanism, the further they move from the conditions under which the mechanism operates. The presence does not experience the desert as a set of variables. It experiences it as a continuous field. Understanding that field may require abandoning the expectation of singular answers. Science often asks, which signal matters most? The desert may answer, none alone. The presence may not distinguish between pressure radiation and vibration as separate inputs. It may respond to an emergent quality created by their interaction, a change in how the environment feels as a whole. This feel is not mystical. It is physical but composite. Humans experience similar integration unconsciously. Balance, for example, depends on vision, proprioception, and vestibular input combined. No single signal explains stability. Remove one, and the system compensates until it cannot. Desert survival may operate similarly. The presence maintains alignment until the combined signal shifts enough to demand reduction of exposure. It does not wait for a specific input to cross a line. It responds when the system as a whole begins moving toward intolerance. This responsiveness resists quantification. It also resists falsification. No experiment has yet reproduced the exact conditions under which the presence withdraws, then isolated a single variable responsible. Attempts to attribute behavior to one cause consistently leave unexplained variance. That variance is the unanswered question. Another uncertainty lies in learning versus inheritance. Does the presence refine its responsiveness over time, adjusting through experience? Or is the behavior embedded, shaped over generations by elimination of those who failed to withdraw early enough? Evidence supports both possibilities, but conclusively proving either is difficult. Learning implies memory adaptation within a lifetime. Inheritance implies selection patterns encoded without individual awareness. Both could produce similar outcomes. The desert does not reveal which dominates. What complicates matters further is the absence of error. The presence does not often make visible mistakes. Its withdrawal rarely appears premature enough to cost opportunity significantly, nor late enough to incur obvious penalty. This precision suggests calibration beyond trial and error learning. But absence of error could also be the result of strong selection pressure, eliminating visible failures long before observation occurs. Science struggles with absence. It studies what happens, not what does not. The presence's strategy leaves little evidence. No bodies, no dramatic near misses, no failed attempts to analyze. This makes the behavior appear enigmatic. The desert reinforces this opacity. It erases traces quickly. Tracks vanish. Thermal signatures fade. Vibrational patterns shift. By the time researchers arrive, the moment has passed. Understanding requires anticipation, not reaction. This mirrors the presence itself. It responds before danger becomes visible. To study it effectively, science may need to adopt a similar posture, looking for beginnings rather than endpoints. That requires patience and acceptance of ambiguity. Current models can describe how heat moves, how pressure shifts, how vibration propagates. They cannot yet describe how these signals combine into actionable information for a living organism embedded in the system. That integration remains the unanswered core. The presence does not provide an explanation. It provides a challenge. It suggests that survival in extreme environments may depend less on extraordinary abilities, and more on responsiveness to change at scales science has not prioritized. This does not diminish science. It refines its questions. Instead of asking what signal triggers withdrawal, the more accurate question may be how early integration of subtle signals produces alignment. The desert may not offer a single answer. It may offer a reminder. Not all intelligence announces itself through complexity. Not all awareness requires cognition. Some systems persist simply by staying aligned with change before change demands acknowledgement. The presence embodies this possibility. Science has not yet mapped the full chain between invisible signals and visible behavior. It has not resolved how much sensitivity is enough, how integration occurs, or how consistency is maintained across variable conditions. These gaps are not failures. They are frontiers. The desert does not yield its lessons easily. It does not reward certainty. It rewards humility before complexity. What remains unanswered is not whether the present senses something. It is how much remains unseen simply because we look for answers where clarity arrives too late. The presence moves early. Science is still catching up. Humans do not lack senses. They lack priority. Our perception evolved to favor immediacy signals that demand action, now not those that hint at what will matter later. Pain, heat, noise, visual motion. These are cues that interrupt attention because they correlate with immediate risk or opportunity. The desert does not operate on immediacy. Its most consequential changes occur quietly distributed across time and space. By the time a human feels heat as threat, the system has already shifted far beyond the point where early adjustment would have been cheap. This is not a failure of intelligence. It is a mismatch of scale. Human perception is tuned to thresholds. We notice when something crosses a line, when temperature becomes uncomfortable, when pressure changes abruptly, when sound becomes loud enough to command attention. These thresholds are efficient in most environments. In the desert, they arrive too late. Micro-pressure shifts do not register because they do not disrupt breathing or balance. Thermal radiation goes unnoticed because it does not feel like heat until accumulation has already occurred. Background oscillation remains invisible because it does not resemble vibration we associate with movement or threat. None of these signals trigger urgency. Human attention is selective by necessity. We filter out what does not matter now. The desert's early warnings matter later. Our sensory hierarchy was not designed to elevate them. This hierarchy shapes behavior. When conditions appear stable, cool air, dark sky, manageable surface, humans interpret this as permission. We move, linger, explore. We trust what we feel. By the time sensation contradicts that trust, correction requires urgency. The desert does not reward urgency. Another limitation lies in mediation. Humans experience the environment indirectly. Shoes insulate contact. Tools buffer resistance. Artificial surfaces interrupt tactile feedback. Even bare skin interacts with the ground intermittently, not continuously. The presence does not have this separation. Constant contact with the substrate provides uninterrupted feedback. Changes in resistance, vibration, and stability are experienced directly, not filtered through layers designed for comfort or protection. Humans traded sensitivity for versatility. This trade-off enabled survival across diverse environments, but it reduced resolution at the scale the desert communicates. What we gain in adaptability, we lose in early warning. Technology compensates only partially. Instruments can detect micropressure radiation and vibration, but interpretation remains delayed. Data must be collected, processed, contextualized. By the time a trend is recognized, the moment for cheap adjustment has passed. The presence does not interpret, it responds. Another factor is expectation. Humans expect danger to escalate visibly. We look for signs that match our narratives rising heat, obvious discomfort, dramatic change. When these signs do not appear, we assume safety persists. The desert exploits this assumption. Its escalation is structural, not theatrical. It does not signal intention. It does not announce deadlines. It simply accumulates imbalance until response becomes expensive. Humans also rely heavily on vision. In the desert, visual cues are misleading. The landscape appears unchanged long after tolerance has begun to collapse. Shadows persist. Surfaces look identical. Distance deceives. The presence does not rely on sight. Its information arrives through contact, through the ground, through signals that do not produce imagery. Humans privilege what they can see. The desert hides its most important changes from view. Cognition further complicates matters. Humans seek explanations before action. We want to know why something is happening. We hesitate when information feels incomplete. Ambiguity delays decision-making. The desert punishes hesitation. The presence does not require explanation. It treats ambiguity as instruction. When signals lose clarity, it reduces exposure. No narrative is needed. Humans often do the opposite. We push forward to resolve uncertainty. We gather more data. We wait for confirmation. In doing so, we spend margin unknowingly. This difference is cultural as well as biological. Human survival strategies emphasize control measuring, predicting mastering. The desert resists control. It rewards alignment. Alignment does not require understanding every variable. It requires responsiveness to direction. Humans are excellent at analysis after the fact. We reconstruct what went wrong once consequences are visible. The desert demands adjustment before consequences appear. Our sensory system is not optimized for that. Even when humans intellectually understand desert danger, their bodies lag behind. Knowledge does not override perception easily. A cool breeze feels safe regardless of what models predict. Darkness feels protective even when it is not. The presence has no such conflict. Its responses are not mediated by belief or expectation. They are embedded, automatic, unargued. When alignment weakens, behavior changes immediately. Humans must convince themselves. This delay is costly. Another limitation lies in scale of attention. Humans focus on discrete events. The desert operates continuously. Small changes accumulate across hours. No single moment stands out as decisive. The danger is distributed. Distributed danger is difficult to perceive. Our attention drifts when nothing seems to be happening. We relax vigilance. We normalize conditions that are slowly becoming hostile. The presence does not normalize. Its baseline expectation is that conditions will deteriorate. It treats stability as temporary. This expectation biases behavior toward preservation rather than exploitation. Humans often assume stability unless proven otherwise. In the desert, this assumption fails. The environment does not provide proof until it is too late. Even when humans attempt to attune themselves, physiology limits resolution. Skin receptors are tuned to detect change, not drift. Nerves fire in response to difference, not direction. Slow gradients do not trigger alarms. The presence operates within those gradients. Its withdrawal aligns with slope, not cliff. This is why humans often describe desert danger as sudden, even when it is not. The change feels abrupt because perception lagged behind reality. The desert did not change suddenly. Awareness did. The presence never experiences that lag. It moves with the system rather than chasing awareness after the fact. This difference does not imply superiority. It reflects specialization. Humans evolved to navigate varied environments through abstraction and tool use. The presence evolved to persist in one of the most unforgiving systems on Earth. Each strategy has limits. In the desert, abstraction is slow. Tools arrive late. Sensation misleads. Alignment works better. Understanding this gap does not require diminishing human capability. It requires recognizing that perception is shaped by environment, and environments demand different priorities. The desert speaks softly at first. Humans are not built to listen to whispers. We hear only when the voice becomes loud. By then, the message has already been delivered. The presence listens earlier, not because it is wiser, but because its survival depends on signals humans were never meant to hear. The desert does not teach through drama. It teaches through what quietly remains. When the cycle completes and conditions relax, there is no moment that announces resolution, no signal that declares victory or defeat. Life returns unevenly, cautiously, as if testing whether the system truly allows engagement again. What survived does not celebrate, it simply resumes. This is where the lesson hides. Most stories of survival focus on the peak, the moment when danger becomes undeniable, when endurance is tested openly. We are drawn to the instant of confrontation, to the visible struggle against conditions that seem overwhelming. But the desert does not decide survival at the peak. It decides it long before. By the time escalation becomes obvious, outcomes are already set in motion. Those still present are not competing for survival. They are settling accounts for decisions made earlier. This is why the most important moment leaves no image. The presence did not survive by enduring the worst of the desert. It survived by refusing to participate in that phase at all. Its success is defined not by what it faced, but by what it avoided. This contradicts nearly every instinct we associate with survival. We admire persistence. We value staying power. We tell stories about those who push through discomfort and remain when others fall away. In the desert, this instinct becomes a liability. Here, staying is often the mistake. The environment does not reward proof of toughness. It rewards timing. Those who leave early do not look heroic. They look absent. Their success leaves no trace because it avoids the conditions that would produce one. Absence is misunderstood. We assume absence means loss. In extreme systems, absence often means preservation. Those who are not present during escalation are the ones who do not need to recover afterward. The presence embodies this inversion. It does not wait for danger to feel real. It responds when alignment weakens, when signals stop making sense, when clarity dissolves, when the environment begins drifting toward intolerance. This moment is subtle. It does not feel like threat. And because it does not feel like threat, it is usually ignored. Most organisms, including humans, wait for confirmation. We want discomfort, pain, or visible change before we adjust behavior. We trust sensation. We trust what we can see and feel. The desert exploits this trust. Its most consequential shifts do not arrive as pain. They arrive as direction, as trend, as gradual loss of margin that does not register until it is spent. The presence treats this loss of margin as instruction. It does not need to understand why the environment is changing. It does not analyze cause. It does not seek explanation. When alignment begins to slip, exposure is reduced. This simplicity is deceptive. From the outside, the behavior appears almost passive. There is no dramatic response, no visible urgency. Yet this restraint preserves everything that matters. The lesson here is not about heightened perception. It is about redefining what deserves response. Danger does not begin when conditions hurt. It begins when conditions stop being reliable. Reliability is difficult to sense. It is easier to feel pain than to feel drift. It is easier to respond to shock than to respond to uncertainty. The desert punishes this preference relentlessly. Those who wait for certainty spend margin they cannot afford. Those who treat uncertainty as signal preserve flexibility. This lesson extends beyond the desert. Any system governed by delayed consequence operates the same way. Financial collapse, ecological breakdown, physiological burnout, none announce themselves at the moment when cheap correction is still possible. They begin with small misalignments tolerated because nothing feels wrong yet. By the time pain arrives, the system has already shifted too far. The presence offers no warning about these systems. It offers a mirror. It suggests that survival is not about reacting faster to visible danger, but about responding earlier to invisible change. This idea is uncomfortable. It undermines narratives of resilience that equate survival with endurance. It suggests that some of the most effective strategies look like retreat, restraint, or refusal to engage. These strategies are rarely celebrated because they leave no evidence. Science, like culture, is unsettled by this. We are trained to study events, measurable responses to measurable stimuli. We look for triggers, thresholds, and outcomes. We catalog stress, failure, recovery. The presence produces none of these at the decisive moment. Its withdrawal occurs when nothing appears to justify it. No instrument spikes. No threshold is crossed. There is no event to record. What remains is a gap where behavior should have been, but was not. This absence resists analysis. It produces no data. It leaves no trail. By the time conditions become measurable as dangerous, the behavior that mattered has already passed. Failure is loud. Success is silent. The desert amplifies this asymmetry. Those who misjudge leave traces. Erratic movement, collapsed activity, delayed recovery. Those who align early leave nothing at all. Science struggles with nothing. We can measure heat pressure, radiation, vibration. We can model their interactions. But the integration of these signals, the moment when they collectively indicate that alignment is weakening, does not manifest as a single measurable event. It manifests as a decision not to be present. This forces a reconsideration of how survival is understood. Perhaps some forms of intelligence do not express themselves through problem-solving or prediction. Perhaps they express themselves through responsiveness to change before change demands acknowledgement. The presence does not conquer the desert. It listens to it quietly, continuously, and steps aside when the rhythm breaks. This stepping aside is not weakness, it is fluency. Fluency in a system that does not forgive delay. The desert does not care about bravery, persistence, or effort. It does not negotiate. It does not explain. It simply applies pressure until only those who preserved margin remain viable. The presence preserved margin by refusing to spend it during phases where spending yields no benefit. This choice is rarely visible. It produces no climax, and yet it determines everything. When the desert repeats its cycle as it always does, the pattern will repeat as well. Escalation will begin quietly. Alignment will weaken subtly. Signals will drift before danger appears. Most will wait. Some will endure. A few will step aside early. Those few will not look exceptional. They will not dominate. They will not expand dramatically when conditions improve. They will simply continue. This continuity is the desert's verdict. Survival here is not about meeting the environment head-on. It is about recognizing when engagement has become irrelevant. The presence teaches this without teaching. It leaves no instructions. It offers no guarantees. It simply persists. And in doing so, it raises a question that remains unanswered. Not because it is mystical, but because it is uncomfortable. How many systems do we fail to survive? Not because we were unprepared for danger, but because we waited for danger to feel real. The desert does not answer this question. It does not need to. It repeats itself. Those who learn to step aside early remain. Those who wait for proof disappear later, often without understanding why. The presence does not explain the desert. It reveals its rule. And that rule is simple, unforgiving, and easy to miss. In environments governed by delayed consequence, survival belongs not to those who endure the peak, but to those who are no longer there when the peak arrives.